The island looked like paradise in the brochure. But once we got there, it felt like a bad copy of one. The beach was empty, the water murky, and the cabins were too far from each other. Anna didn't seem to care. She said she wanted peace and privacy. I thought she meant time together. A young guy met us at the dock. He wore a shirt that said staff and had that awkward smile people use when they're not paid enough to deal with tourists. His name was Leo. He helped us carry our bags, eyes darting between us like he was trying to read something in our faces. Our cabin was small, with creaky floors and a bed that smelled like bleach. Anna unpacked quietly, folding her clothes with this mechanical precision that made me feel like she'd done it alone 1,000 times before. We tried to talk. She nodded without listening. At dinner, she was different. She laughed, touched my hand, said she was happy. I believed her. We went back to the cabin and she poured the wine that came on the house. It was bitter, but she insisted I drink more. By the time I realized how heavy my eyelids felt, it was too late. I woke up to the sound of a fly buzzing near my ear. My head throbbed. My arms were behind me, my ankles tied to the chair legs. For a few seconds, I didn't even panic. I just stared at the rope, trying to understand what kind of joke this was. Then I saw her. Anna was sitting on the bed, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for a delivery. Her hair was up, her makeup perfect. When she finally looked at me, she didn't flinch. She just said, "You shouldn't have trusted me so easily." A man came out of the bathroom, tall, tanned, confident. He smiled at me the way people smile at something already broken. He kissed her in front of me, slow and deliberate. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was dry, my body too weak to fight. He asked her when they should start. She told him soon. Then she looked at me again, cold, detached, and said this had always been the plan. They'd been waiting for this trip. I was just a ticket to a payout, and my death would look like a stupid accident. Anna started talking like we were at dinner again. She said she wanted to clear the air before it all ended. She told me about Daniel, the man standing behind her, and how they had met long before I ever came into the picture. Every word felt like a nail going deeper. She said she married for convenience, that she'd already planned how it would happen. The insurance money, the fake witnesses, the tragic story of the husband who fell from the dock after drinking too much. She spoke with no emotion, as if she were describing someone else's life. Then she grabbed a knife from the table and started tracing it along my arm, light enough not to cut. She asked if I ever wondered why she picked me. I didn't answer. She pressed harder until a drop of blood slid down my wrist. Daniel told her to hurry up, that they needed to make it look clean. She ignored him, focusing on me, smiling. She said this was her favorite part, when people realized they were never loved. I kept my mouth shut. There was nothing I could say that would make her stop. While all this was happening, Leo was doing his last walk before going to sleep. He passed by our cabin and saw Anna through the thin curtains. She was talking to someone who wasn't me. He couldn't see the man's face clearly, but it was enough to make him stop walking. He froze. For a few seconds he stayed still, then turned around and started walking away fast. Before he reached the path to the main building, a door slammed behind him. Daniel was there, and Leo could see him perfectly. Leo didn't look back. He ran. Outside, Daniel had gone after Leo. He sprinted down the sand path, cutting through the trees toward the main dock. The wind carried Daniel's voice, angry, desperate, getting closer. Leo tripped once, scraped his hand on a rock, but didn't stop. The tension was unbearable. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of sand, the rustle of leaves, the thud of footsteps behind him. When he finally saw the dim light of the service shack near the dock, he started shouting for help. 2 maintenance workers were there, half asleep, and one of them grabbed a flashlight. By the time Daniel reached the clearing, Leo was already behind the workers. The men didn't know what was happening, but Daniel stopped when he saw them. He stood there, breathing hard, his shirt soaked in sweat, eyes wild. The workers threatened to call the police, and Daniel turned back, disappearing into the dark path. Leo didn't wait. He used the radio inside the shack to call for help. The connection was weak, but it went through. The local police were already on another part of the island, close enough to respond. Back in the cabin, Anna was getting restless. She checked her phone again, muttering that Daniel was taking too long. She paced around, kicking the burnt photo ashes from the floor. I stayed quiet, wrists raw, trying to loosen the rope without her noticing. She suddenly stopped and looked out the window. Headlights. For a split second, she looked confused. The sound of boots and voices hit the silence. She rushed toward the knife, but before she could reach it, the door burst open. 3 officers came in, shouting. She froze. One of them grabbed her arms while the others spread out, checking the room. Daniel was dragged in seconds later, covered in dirt, screaming at her not to say anything. She shouted his name like a warning, but no one cared. One of the officers cut the ropes off my wrists. My hands were shaking too much to move. I remember them pulling me up, guiding me outside, asking if I was hurt. I couldn't answer. The air outside felt thick, full of gasoline and sea salt. They sat me on the steps while they cuffed the 2 of them. Anna kept her eyes on me the whole time. Not angry, not scared, just empty. They were both charged. Attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud. The case made headlines for a few days because it was too cinematic to be real. Anna didn't speak at the trial, but Daniel did. He said it was all her idea. She smiled when he said it, like she was proud. Leo testified too, and that was the only reason I knew his part of the story. He said he didn't understand what he saw that night until it was too late. The officers called him the reason I was alive. I thanked him once outside of the courthouse. He just said, "Don't mention it," and left before the reporters could find him. In 2017, Antonio Navarro Cerdan was murdered in Valencia, Spain. His wife, Maria Jesus Moreno Canto, widely known as Magi, the Black Widow, and her lover were convicted of planning and carrying out the crime. The case became a media sensation due to its mix of passion, betrayal, and manipulation. Magi maintained an affair while plotting her husband's death, using her lover to execute the plan. Though not a honeymoon murder, it perfectly fits the pattern of love, deceit, and fatal obsession that later inspired a film and a documentary adaptation.
Clara and I arrived in Bali on a humid Tuesday afternoon. The heat felt like it was pressing down on us the moment we stepped out of the airport. We'd been married less than a year, and this was supposed to be our big vacation, somewhere quiet, far from everything. The hotel looked perfect online, isolated on a cliffside with a private pool and an ocean view. It was exactly what she wanted. The staff was polite but distant. No one smiled too long. A man helped us with our luggage but didn't say a word. I remember Clara whispering that he never made eye contact. We ignored it and went to our room. It was small but nice. White sheets, bamboo furniture, and a sliding door that opened to the balcony. The air smelled like salt and mildew. That first night was calm. We had dinner at the hotel restaurant, drank too much wine, and went back to the room laughing. I fell asleep first. When I woke up around 3 a.m., I heard something that sounded like someone pacing slowly outside our door. I waited, listening. It stopped after a minute, and I convinced myself it was the sound of the night guard doing rounds. I didn't mention it to Clara. The next morning, we went down for breakfast. I noticed 2 men sitting in the corner near the entrance. Both wore dark shirts and sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. One of them stared at me when I looked up. I turned away quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed. By the second night, Clara was acting restless. She said she didn't feel safe, like someone was always watching us. I tried to calm her down, but truthfully, I'd seen the same 2 men near the pool that afternoon. They weren't guests, I could tell. They didn't swim or talk to anyone. They just sat there, pretending to scroll on their phones, always facing us. We spent most of the evening in our room, Clara wanted to call her parents, but they didn't answer. I told her I'd go down to the front desk to ask about it. The lobby was empty except for the same man who carried our bags on the first day. He was wiping the counter slowly, like he wasn't listening. I asked about the internet, and he just nodded without looking at me. I went back upstairs, uneasy. When I entered the room, Clara was sitting on the bed, pale. She said someone had knocked while I was gone, just 2 soft taps on the door. When she looked through the peephole, there was no one there. I checked the hallway, nothing. The silence in that corridor didn't feel normal. It felt staged, like everyone was waiting for something. I locked the door and pushed a chair under the handle. We kept the lights on the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. Every small sound from outside made me jump. Around 4 a.m, I heard another knock, this time slower, deliberate. Clara covered her mouth, shaking. I didn't open it. We tried to act normal in the morning. Went to the beach, took some photos, pretended things were fine, but it wasn't. The same 2 men were there again, sitting under an umbrella not far from us. One of them was pretending to read a newspaper, upside down. Clara wanted to go back to the hotel immediately. That night she told me she wanted to leave. I checked flights, but everything was full until Friday. She suggested we call the embassy. I told her to wait 1 more day. Maybe we were just overthinking it. But I was lying. Every time I turned around, I expected to see those men again. The tension grew heavier as the sun went down. We ate dinner in silence and went straight to our room. Around midnight, we heard a sound. A slow, dragging noise outside the door, like fabric sliding over the floor. We froze. Then came 3 short knocks. Clara whispered that we should call the front desk. I tried, but the phone was dead. No tone, no signal. I stared at the door for what felt like hours. When I finally looked through the peephole, all I saw was darkness. Nothing had happened. Next night, our last night there, Clara was exhausted. She hadn't slept properly since we arrived. Her eyes looked sunken, her voice cracked every time she spoke. I promised her we'd leave the next day no matter what. She nodded, but didn't say anything. We ordered food to the room. When the knock came, I hesitated before opening. It was a hotel worker holding a tray, smiling faintly. I thanked him, gave him a tip, and closed the door. The meal tasted like nothing. I remember how quiet it was while we ate, the air conditioner humming unevenly. Later, Clara took a shower. I sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through my phone, trying to book an earlier flight. Then another knock. Gentle, familiar. I told myself it was room service collecting dishes. I got up and opened the door. The 2 men were standing there. One of them raised something shiny, metal, and before I could speak, it smashed against my face. Pain exploded in my skull. My vision blurred. I fell backward, hearing Clara scream from the bathroom. I tried to get up, but a boot hit my ribs. I saw one of them grab her by the arm, dragging her out. She kicked, hit him, screamed my name, but the other man punched her hard enough to silence her. I crawled forward, reaching for her, but another hit came down. Everything went dark. When I woke up, the room was dim and smelled like blood and wet fabric. My head throbbed. The bed was upside down, the curtains torn, the bathroom door was open. Lights still on. Clara was gone. I called her name, my throat raw. No answer. I stumbled into the hallway, empty. The entire floor looked deserted. No staff, no guests. I ran to the elevator, but it didn't respond. I took the stairs to the lobby, shouting for help. The front desk was empty again. Phones disconnected. I felt like the whole hotel had died overnight. I went back to the room, dizzy. Everything looked untouched, except for one thing. A large black suitcase sitting near the balcony. It was ours, but we hadn't used it since the first day. My stomach turned. I stepped closer, each step slower than the last. The zipper was half open. I knelt down and pulled it. A wave of rot hit me. Her hair was the first thing I saw. Tangled, blonde, stiff. Her skin was pale, lips cracked open. She was folded inside, knees bent unnaturally against her chest. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. I couldn't scream, I just sat there shaking. The world silent, except for the sound of the zipper still dangling. The police arrived hours later. I don't remember calling them. Maybe someone else did. They dragged me out of the room, sat me down in the lobby, and questioned me for hours. They thought I did it, said it looked like a domestic murder. My fingerprints were everywhere. I told them about the men, the knocks, the attack. No one believed me. It wasn't until they checked the cameras that they saw two figures entering our floor at midnight and leaving 20 minutes later with something heavy between them. The hotel staff claimed they'd never seen those men before, but one of the officers, an older guy, told me quietly that they'd been following Clara for days before the trip. A week later, Interpol confirmed it. Her father had been involved in some shady business deals back home. Money laundering, stolen assets, offshore accounts. The men worked for one of the people he'd cheated. They couldn't find him, so they found her instead. That's why they waited. That's why they followed us. They used me as a witness, not a suspect. But every night since then, I've dreamed of that suitcase, of the zipper closing, sealing her inside while I was lying unconscious just a few feet away. It's horrible. It's like I can see how it happened, but in reality, I know it was probably much worse. The story I'm about to tell you may seem rather improbable, but rest assured that if my story were not hard to believe, I would not be alive. It all started that fateful Saturday. My wife and I had just gotten married and decided to start our honeymoon. This was my first day of honeymoon with her, and we were going to an island paradise on a beautiful cruise ship. Everything was going well until a strong storm hit the cruise ship with full force. The ship was going back and forth, furniture and pictures were falling down, children were crying, and some parents with seasickness were vomiting so much that they couldn't calm them down. The captain gathered us in the main salon to give us some tranquility. The rain stopped after a few minutes, but the cruise ship lost its course. Out of nowhere, a loud bang on the bottom of the ship alerted everyone. The ship's workers went down to see what was happening, and in a few seconds, the screams began. Violent screams full of pain and panic covered every meter of the cruise ship. Then, silence. The captain told us to lock ourselves in our rooms. From there, the nightmare began. In a matter of minutes, the lights went out and the screams multiplied. When we thought of leaving the room, it was too late. The screams were getting closer and closer. "Please help us! It's right behind us! Please! No!"
What should we do? Should we help them?
No. We don't know what's going on. We could be in danger too, especially if we go that way.
And we are just going to stand here?
No. For now, we should hide under the bed.
Why?
Because someone can be attacking us, like terrorists or something.
Terrorists? In a cruise?
I don't know, okay? But we really should hide. If we see water in the floor, the cruise is sinking. Then we should run upstairs, but only if that happens.
Okay, you're right.
What was it that was killing all the passengers? The noise came from below. Did a submarine hit us? Suddenly, my bedroom door exploded. My wife and I were hiding under the bed when we saw what came in. It was a miracle we didn't scream. A strange being was standing in front of us. It looked like an amphibian, but its legs were positioned like those of a human. It inspected the room for a while and, disinterested, it left. We thought about staying hidden until the monster left, but we began to feel water brushing against our toes. The ship was flooding. We took a chance and ran out of the room, and when I turned around to look back, I saw it. It was a huge being, more than 2 meters long. It was a huge amphibian with a huge toad head. When it looked at me, I noticed that it was swallowing a person. The victim was being swallowed without being chewed, as if it was entering a black hole. The legs kicked desperately until suddenly they stopped moving and ended up entering the amphibian's mouth. Once it had devoured its prey, the creature began to run towards us. It was very fast, and the big head start we had wasn't enough. In an act of desperation, I grabbed a decorative painting and used it to attack the monster and buy us some time. To my surprise, the monster dodged me without any difficulty. At that moment, I realized that I was about to die, exposed before this horrendous and dangerous being. But to my surprise, something much worse happened. The monster ignored me and kept running. He never chased me. He wanted my wife. My wife made it to the door, but before she could close it, the monster reached in. She used all her strength to try and close it, but it was obvious that she was giving in to the horrendous being. As the monster was about to open the door, I hit it using the frame with all of my strength. Being distracted, it didn't dodge my blow, and I managed to stun it for a few seconds, which I used to go to my wife and close the door before it reached us. I told my wife to run, that I would stay and lock the door, and if either of us let go, we would both die. She understood and ran desperately, and when she got far enough away, I let go of the door and started running. This time I had no chance. The monster was too close and would catch up with me. I started to escape through the side of the huge cruiser, and when I was about to be the next victim of the amphibian, I jumped into the water, praying it wouldn't catch me. When I fell in the water, there was no trace of the monster near me, so I breathed a sigh of relief. There was no way it could catch my wife. Near me was a person with a life jacket. The man might have been protected from drowning, but he had a huge wound that cost him his life. I took the life jacket and looked up as a helicopter was arriving above me. I couldn't see well, but I recognized my wife inside the helicopter. After that, I swam away as I watched the cruiser sink. I didn't want to be near that monster when it happened. A few hours later, I had a stroke of luck, and a small boat found me and picked me up. When I got ashore, I tried every way I could to contact my wife, but it was to no avail. Neither she nor any of the other passengers ever showed up again. No one ever reported what happened to that cruise ship. It was as if it never existed. When I tried to raise my voice, I only received mockery and some insults on the networks. But outside of them, I began to see how some people were watching me. They didn't even bother to hide. It was as if they wanted me to know that they were watching me. I don't know who these people are or what will happen to me in the future. I just want to find my wife and forget what happened with that terrifying monster. But every time I close my eyes, I see it.
I lived in that house for 2 years before the night that changed everything. It was a typical college rental, the kind of place where 6 roommates split the rent and learned to navigate each other's schedules and quirks. We had parties on weekends, study sessions during finals, lazy Sunday mornings where we all crowded into the kitchen making breakfast and complaining about hangovers. It felt safe, familiar, like the kind of place where nothing truly terrible could ever happen. I was wrong about that in the worst possible way. November in northern Washington always brought early darkness and cold that seeped through the windows no matter how high we cranked the heat. That weekend started like any other. My roommates going out to parties and bars while I stayed home, exhausted from a long week of classes and part-time work. I went to bed early, around midnight, while the others were still out. The house was quiet when I fell asleep, just the usual creaks and settling sounds I had learned to ignore over the months of living there. I woke up sometime after 4 in the morning to the sound of voices. At first I thought my roommates had come home and were talking in the hallway, maybe a little drunk and louder than they realized. I remember being annoyed, thinking about how I had an early class and needed sleep, but not concerned. People coming home late was normal in a house full of college students. I rolled over, pulled my pillow over my head, and tried to drift back to sleep. Then I heard something that made my eyes snap open. A thud, heavy and solid, like something falling or being dropped on the floor above me. Then another sound, harder to describe, somewhere between a gasp and a cry that cut off too quickly. My room was on the first floor, directly below one of the bedrooms upstairs, and sound carried easily through the old floors and thin walls. I lay there frozen, listening, my heart starting to pound, even though I did not yet understand why. The house went silent again, completely, unnaturally silent. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of doors opening or closing. Just that heavy quiet that feels wrong when you know other people are supposed to be home. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe someone had dropped something or stumbled while drunk, that everything was fine and I should go back to sleep. But something kept me awake, some primal instinct that recognized danger even when my conscious mind refused to accept it. I heard footsteps then, slow and deliberate, moving through the hallway upstairs. Not the familiar rhythm of my roommates' walks, but something different, heavier, more purposeful. The steps moved from one room to another, pausing at doorways, and with each pause my fear grew stronger. I wanted to get up, to check on everyone, to call out and ask if everything was okay, but I could not move. Terror had frozen me in place, my body refusing to cooperate with what my mind was telling it to do. The footsteps descended the stairs. I could track their progress by sound alone, each step bringing whoever it was closer to my floor, closer to my room. They passed by my door, so close I could see the shadow of feet blocking the light from under the door frame, and continued toward the back of the house. I heard the sliding door that led to the backyard open and then close, and then nothing. Just silence again, deeper and more terrible than before. I do not know how long I lay there, too terrified to move, trying to process what I had heard. Part of me wanted to believe it was nothing, just roommates coming home drunk or moving furniture or doing something that had a perfectly reasonable explanation. But another part of me, the part that kept me frozen in my bed with my door locked, knew something was horribly wrong. When the sun finally came up, I found the courage to leave my room. The house was too quiet, none of the usual morning sounds of people getting ready for class or making coffee. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs shaking, and that is when I saw the first door standing open, the room beyond it visible in a way that made my stomach drop. I did not go inside. I could see enough from the hallway to know I needed to call for help. I ran back downstairs, grabbed my phone with trembling hands, and dialed emergency services. My voice barely worked when the dispatcher answered, the words coming out in gasps and sobs as I tried to explain that something terrible had happened, that my roommates were not responding, that I had heard things during the night, but did not understand until now what they meant. The police arrived within minutes, flooding the house with officers and paramedics and people in protective gear. They made me wait outside while they went through the house, and I stood on the lawn in the cold morning air, watching neighbors gather and whisper, knowing from the expressions on the officers' faces that it was worse than I had imagined. 4 of my roommates were gone. The people I had lived with, laughed with, shared meals and late-night conversations with, were all dead, murdered while I slept 1 floor below. The guilt came immediately and has never left. I heard everything, the footsteps and the sounds and the moments when I could have done something, called the police, screamed, done anything except lie, frozen in my bed, convincing myself it was nothing. The investigators told me later that there was nothing I could have done, that calling out or intervening would have only added me to the list of victims. But that knowledge does not ease the weight of knowing I was there, alive and safe, while my friends were being killed just feet above my head. They caught him eventually. A graduate student from a nearby university who had been watching our house, studying our routines, planning his attack with the kind of methodical precision that makes my skin crawl. He confessed, avoided the death penalty, and will spend the rest of his life in prison. But that does not bring back the people who died, does not undo the trauma of that night, does not stop me from waking up at 4 a.m. convinced I can hear footsteps in the hallway. I moved out of that house the day the police cleared it as a crime scene. I could not stay, could not sleep in that room knowing what had happened above me, could not walk through those hallways without seeing the shadows and hearing the sounds that will echo in my memory forever. I left college, moved back home with my parents, and spent months in therapy trying to process the survivor's guilt that threatened to drown me. People ask me how I am doing now, if I have moved on, if time has made it easier to bear. The truth is that some things do not fade. I still check every lock multiple times before bed. I still cannot sleep on the first floor of any building. I still wake up in the middle of the night listening for sounds that should not be there, my body remembering that terror even when my mind tries to forget. The worst part is not what I saw the next morning or the months of investigation and trial that followed. The worst part is knowing that I heard everything, that for those crucial minutes when my friends needed help, I was paralyzed by fear, unable to act, and that hesitation is something I will carry for the rest of my life. I survived that night, but I am not sure I will ever truly escape it. If you ever hear something that feels wrong, if your instincts scream that danger is near, trust that feeling. Call for help. Do not wait. Do not rationalize. Do not convince yourself it is nothing, because sometimes the sounds in the dark are exactly what you fear they are, and hesitation can mean the difference between life and death. I learned that lesson too late to save my friends, but maybe someone else can learn it in time to save themselves. My GPS showed a town called Millbrook Valley directly on my route, a perfect halfway point where I could stop for gas and food during my cross-country drive through rural Montana. The map displayed it clearly, streets and buildings, and even reviews for a diner that supposedly served the best pie in the state. But when I reached the coordinates where Millbrook Valley should have been, I found only empty grassland stretching in every direction, no buildings, no roads, no sign that humans had ever lived here at all. I checked my phone 3 times, confirmed I was at the exact location the GPS indicated, but there was nothing except prairie grass and silence so complete it felt like the world had been emptied of everything except me and my car, and the growing certainty that something was very wrong. I tried to search for alternate gas stations, but my phone insisted Millbrook Valley was right here, showed street view photos of a main street with shops and houses, displayed business hours for places that did not exist in the empty fields surrounding me. Then my fuel light came on. I had planned to fill up in Millbrook Valley, had been running low specifically because the GPS promised a town at this location, and now I was stranded in the middle of nowhere with maybe 20 miles of range left, and no idea which direction would lead to actual civilization. I chose east, following what my paper atlas showed as the nearest highway. But after 10 miles of driving, the GPS started insisting I had made a wrong turn, that I needed to go back to Millbrook Valley, that everything I needed was waiting there if I would just return to the coordinates. I ignored it and kept driving, but 5 miles later I saw buildings ahead, a small town appearing on the horizon exactly where my map showed only empty land. Relief flooded through me until I got close enough to read the welcome sign. Millbrook Valley, population 847, established 1952. The town my GPS had promised, somehow real now, somehow existing in a location where moments ago there had been nothing but grass. The streets were empty despite it being mid-afternoon on a weekday. Shops lined the main road with lights on and open signs displayed, but I saw no people walking, no cars parked. No movement except curtains blowing in windows and doors swinging slightly in wind that I could not feel. I pulled into the gas station, an old-fashioned place with pumps that looked 40 years out of date, and when I got out of my car, the silence was absolute. No birds or insects or distant traffic, just emptiness that felt like the world was holding its breath. The pump worked when I tried it, gas flowing normally, and I filled my tank while watching the empty street and trying to understand how an entire town could exist without people. The diner across the road had customers visible through the window, shapes sitting in booths and moving around the counter. But when I looked directly at them, they seemed to flicker, there one moment and gone the next, like images projected onto glass rather than actual solid bodies. I paid for gas at the automated pump, my credit card going through despite having no cell signal, and got back in my car planning to leave immediately. But when I started the engine, my GPS showed I was no longer in Millbrook Valley, but back at the empty coordinates where the town should have been. And when I looked up at the buildings around me, they seemed less solid, more transparent, like they were fading or like they had never been completely real to begin with. The GPS gave me directions to leave, a simple route that would take me back to the highway in 15 minutes, and I followed it desperately, driving past shops and houses that flickered like bad television reception. But 15 minutes became 30, then an hour, and I kept passing the same landmarks, the same gas station where I had filled up, the same diner with its flickering customers. And I realized the GPS was leading me in circles, showing different street names but returning me to the same locations, trapping me in this town that existed and did not exist simultaneously. I tried driving in a straight line, ignoring all roads and GPS directions, just pointing my car toward where the horizon should be and accelerating. But the streets rearranged themselves, the town stretching and bending so that no matter which direction I drove, I ended up back on Main Street, passing that gas station for the 20th time. And the GPS just kept recalculating, kept showing new routes, kept promising I was almost out when I knew I was never getting out. Other cars started appearing, parked along the streets in positions they had not been before. And when I looked inside them, I saw drivers slumped over steering wheels, some fresh and recently trapped, others decomposed to skeletons, all of them still gripping their phones, showing GPS maps of Millbrook Valley. The town was a collection, a trap that appeared on navigation apps and lured drivers to coordinates where reality was thin, where a phantom place could become solid long enough to capture vehicles and consume the people inside them. The sun never moved. I drove for what felt like hours, but the light stayed constant, stuck in perpetual afternoon, and my gas gauge never dropped below full no matter how many miles the odometer claimed I had driven. Time worked differently here. Or maybe time had stopped entirely, and I was caught in a loop that would repeat until my mind broke or my body gave out, or I became like those other drivers, just another skeleton slumped behind the wheel of a car that would never escape. I am writing this on a notepad I found in my glove box because my phone died hours ago. The battery drained despite being fully charged, and I need to document what happened, so if anyone ever finds my car, they will understand this was not driver error or poor planning, but something that uses technology to hunt. The GPS is still working even with my phone dead, still showing routes through Millbrook Valley, and I understand now that the device is not trying to help me leave, but is keeping me here, is feeding something that exists in the space between where maps say things are and where they actually exist. The flickering people in the diner are watching me now. They stand at the windows with faces that are almost human, but not quite, expressions that suggest hunger and patience and satisfaction that another traveler has been collected. My GPS just announced I have arrived at my final destination, but I never entered a destination into this device, never told it where I wanted to go, and I realize it has been guiding me here since the moment I turned it on, that every route I have ever followed was leading to this phantom town, and I was just traveling the long way around before finally arriving at the place where navigation technology stops pretending to serve humanity and reveals what it has become, a hunting tool for things that exist in the spaces we cannot see waiting patiently for the next driver who trusts a glowing screen more than the evidence of their own eyes telling them to turn back before the town appears and the trap closes and the endless afternoon begins. Hello, SSG Animations. My name is Chris, and this is the most terrifying experience of my life. This happened when I was a kid, growing up in the Appalachian region of West Virginia. What you're about to hear is not fiction. This really happened to me, and 3 of my friends. For privacy, I'll use fake names. You can call them Leo, John, and Charlie. To this day, I still wish none of us had ever gone out that night. It was the summer of 2011. We had just finished 10th grade, and like most stupid teenagers, we wanted to celebrate. Someone suggested exploring an abandoned cotton mill hidden deep in the woods. I think it was called Beckley Mill, or something like that. John's older brother had been there once. He warned us not to go. That should have been enough. But we went anyway. Charlie didn't want to come at first. He had a bad feeling about it. We laughed it off, called him paranoid, and eventually convinced him. That night, we lied to our parents and said we were staying at a friend's house. By the time we met up outside our local Walmart and started walking, it was already around 5 p.m. We didn't realize how far the trail actually was. By the time we reached the area where the mill was supposed to be, the sun was already sinking. We had maybe 1 hour of daylight left. That's when we found it. The mill was worse than we expected. Collapsed walls, rust everywhere, nature slowly swallowing it whole. Still, we tried to enjoy ourselves, drinking sodas, joking around, pretending we weren't scared. That's when I noticed Leo. He wasn't talking. He was staring into the woods, with a look on his face I'd never seen before. I wanted to ask him what was wrong. I didn't. That was my mistake. By the time we finished messing around, it was fully dark. The only light came from the moon, filtering through the trees. When I checked my watch, my stomach dropped. 9:30 p.m. Leo finally spoke up. He said our parents would eventually start calling each other. We needed to leave. That's when Charlie panicked. He said he felt like someone had been watching us, like a man standing just beyond the tree line. We tried to calm him down, told him he was imagining things, but Leo didn't laugh. He just stood there, scanning the darkness. As we walked back, something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. Then we heard it. A strange, low vibration, almost like a hum. It came in short bursts. At the same time, we heard twigs snapping in the distance. Not random, intentional. We reached a clearing we recognized from earlier. Halfway across it, everyone stopped at once. I looked at Charlie. The moonlight revealed his face, and all the color had drained from it. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer. He was staring to his left. So was Leo. So was John. Then I looked. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted. About 150 feet away, I saw it. A silhouette, tall, at least 6 feet 5 inches. Unnaturally thin, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. And on its head, something that looked like a goat skull. At first, I thought it was running away from us. Then my blood turned to ice. It wasn't running away. It was running toward us, fast. We ran. John was already ahead. Me and Leo followed, but Charlie was falling behind. I knew if we didn't do something, it would get him. So we turned back. We grabbed Charlie and pulled him forward. And then I looked behind us. I wish I hadn't. It was maybe 10 feet away, roaring. A sound like a demonic scream, almost like an Aztec death whistle. It was wearing clothes, medieval-looking peasant clothes, but they were too small, like a child's Halloween costume stretched over something that didn't belong in it. The fabric was torn to shreds, and it was closing in, fast. I grabbed Leo and ran downhill as hard as I could. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it didn't catch us. That night, we never saw it again. We split up and went home. My parents didn't believe me at first. Then they saw my face. I was grounded, but something told me they knew this wasn't just a lie. Days later, I met Leo, and what he told me still haunts me. He said that thing had been stalking us from the moment we entered the trail. Every time he looked away and looked back, it was closer, 3 feet closer. Again and again. By the time we were drinking sodas, it was only 20 feet away. He didn't say anything because he didn't want us to panic. He just wanted us to leave alive. We're all doing fine now, but that night never left me. And what scares me the most is knowing what would have happened if Leo hadn't noticed it at all.
The woods happened to be darker than I'd ever seen them that night. almost like I was in some sort of void that swallowed all the light within it. My flashlight was useless, and as I got closer to the horrific screams of my best friend, I found myself fighting the urge to turn around and flee. Leaving Malcolm behind wasn't a decision I was ready to make, though. But when I came face to face with what was supposed to be my best friend, with wet chunks of skin peeling from its body, it became clear to me that I had fallen for a trick, and whatever had called me here was never Malcolm. Instead, it appeared to be the devil itself. My name is Jonathan Shepard, and in the spring of 2023, I was invited back home to Davidson, North Carolina, for the burial of my friend Malcolm's dad. The memorial was held at their cabin home, and Malcolm, who'd been my childhood best friend, was someone I hadn't seen in months. While I felt things wouldn't be that different, I quickly realized after arrival that the Malcolm I'd known and the person I was meeting today were very different people. "Hey man, I'm so sorry for your loss." Malcolm said nothing when I first gave him my condolences. Instead, he remained laser-focused on something in the corner. I followed his gaze and noticed he was staring at Cooper, the family dog they'd had since childhood. I spoke again to get his attention. "Malcolm? Huh? Oh, Jonathan. It's good to see you, man. When did you get in?" "Just this morning. I'm sorry about your dad." "Oh, yes, we all are." Once again, his gaze drifted toward the dog, and there was a visible look of disgust on his face. Concerned, I decided to ask, "Hey, you keep staring at Cooper. What's up with that?" He looked at me confused and replied, "Cooper? Your dog? Oh, that thing. Something's wrong with that thing, but no one believes me." "Something's wrong with it? What, like it's sick or something?" "Oh, please, I wish that thing was sick. Hopefully it'd just die and stop making my life hell. No one fucking believes me when I say it, but that is not our fucking dog." The dog had also been staring at us this whole time, completely still, almost like it was trying not to move. Still, what Malcolm was saying was crazy, and I wondered to myself what else the dog could be. "Listen, man, I came back a couple weeks ago from my Iowa trip, 'cause Dad was sick, and when I got here, that thing just went crazy. Wouldn't stop barking and staring at me like it didn't want me to see what it was doing here." "Well, it seems fine to me." "Yeah, 'cause they had to take it to the vet. But listen, that thing needs to be put down immediately." I could see the genuine concern in Malcolm's eyes. This wasn't the type of thing you'd focus on during your father's burial, but after speaking to his mom and others, they'd said it was something that had consumed him since he got home. For the rest of the day, I began to intentionally look out for the dog, and sure enough, wherever Malcolm was that day, the dog wasn't too far away, staring. Later at night, Malcolm's mom asked if I wanted to go up with her to clear out his dad's bedroom, as she'd been putting it off for a while, and was finally ready to get it over with. Once we got to the room a few minutes after getting into the cleaning, Malcolm's mom broke down into tears. After I comforted her and told her I could do it alone, she left, and I continued putting things away. Under the pillow, there was a journal that looked familiar. I remembered Malcolm's dad had a thing for poetry and used to read some of it to me when I was younger, so I sat for a moment and began flipping through the pages. What caught my attention was that as I neared the end of the book, I noticed a change from poetry to what seemed like day-to-day entries in the journal. Malcolm's dad seemed concerned about something in his home. He claimed the thing was deceptive, and although he was a sick old man, he was certain it wasn't who it said it was. As I read it, I couldn't help but notice how similar his words seemed to Malcolm's earlier that day. The last entry in the journal stood out to me the most, however, and as I read it, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. My time on this earth is coming to an end, and for the life I've lived, I am content. However, a part of me fears for my family and those in my home. The devil that wears the face of my beloved is not who it says it is. If anyone would know, it would be me. I have tried to warn them, but I am not strong enough to convince anyone. I pray the evil leaves my home after I'm gone, and that the Lord protects my family when I will no longer be able to. As soon as I finished reading, a gut-wrenching scream tore through the silence and startled me. Shortly after, while clearly in pain, the person screamed, "Help, help me, please." I recognized Malcolm's voice almost immediately and hurried down the stairs to the rest of his family. All the guests had already left by that time, but I was worried by the fact that I couldn't find Malcolm's mom or anyone else in the house. "Help, please, anyone." The screams seemed to be getting louder. This time it sounded like his mother, and my hands trembled in fear. I wondered what the hell was happening, and the words of Malcolm's dad continued to run through my mind. Could this be what he was talking about? Still, I realized there was no time to ponder as I needed to help Malcolm and his mother. So I called the cops, gave them our location, and followed the voice out into the heart of the woods. The darkness swallowed all the light, and my flashlight only seemed to be able to show what was directly in front of me. As I walked deeper, the raw, piercing screams got louder and alternated between Malcolm's and his mother's, both pleading for help. After every scream was dead silence. No wind, no insects, no leaves. Only my footsteps could be heard along with the screams, and I knew that when nature was silent, it was a sign to turn and run. I couldn't bring myself to abandon them, however, so despite how much I trembled, I rushed forward, my heart racing, determined to get to them and help. As I moved through the woods, I could feel the screams getting closer and closer until I got to a clearing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it and immediately stopped in my tracks. My heart sank, and my throat began to close up as the realization that I would probably die slowly dawned on me. Sitting in the center, hunched over, was Malcolm, or at least what wore his face. Wet chunks of skin lay on the ground around him and continued to fall off his body, revealing raw muscle and bone underneath. A foul stench of rot and something ancient filled the air, and I fought the urge to throw up from how disgusting it smelled. And its eyes, Malcolm's eyes, locked onto mine as it spoke. "Jonathan," it said in Malcolm's voice. Then it spoke again, this time in his mother's voice. "You came." The creature began to laugh in a deep, heavy tone that shook the ground underneath us. This wasn't Malcolm. It had never been Malcolm. This was the thing his father had warned about, the devil wearing familiar skin. You people are all so similar, all so gullible. You all can never resist the urge to help your loved ones in danger. That connection is what killed Malcolm when I first took his skin back in Iowa. That's what killed his pathetic mother earlier this night, and that's what is about to kill you, Jonathan. I fell back in horror as the creature approached. More skin fell from its flesh, and it continued to laugh in different voices, almost like it was taunting me. Then, out of nowhere, Cooper burst through the trees and lunged at the creature. "You disgusting little mutt." The creature struggled to peel Cooper off it, and while I'd hoped the outcome could have been different, I knew I only had a few seconds before Cooper was dead, and I would be next. So I ran. I turned and ran through the woods toward the distant sirens and red and blue lights. Then, once I got to the police, I began to mumble my words. I knew how crazy I was about to sound to anyone who heard the story. I knew they'd never believe me. No one would. But they had to know. Everyone had to know what had happened. So I spoke. "Help me. Help me. There's a skinwalker in the woods." My name is Ethan. I'm 32, and until 2 years ago, I believed every strange story had a rational explanation if you looked hard enough. That certainty died during one night in the Arizona desert, when something that shouldn't have known my mother's voice spent hours trying to talk me out of our truck. My brother Caleb loved photography, and that October he talked me into a weekend shooting the stars near Monument Valley. We packed up and drove out before sunrise, reaching a stretch of desert so isolated we hadn't seen another vehicle in an hour. Caleb found a clearing off an old dirt road. No cell service, no lights for miles, just a sky that looked like someone had spilled powdered glass across black velvet. For a couple of hours it felt like the most peaceful place on earth. Looking back, that was the last time either of us felt normal. It started with the silence, not ordinary quiet, but the kind that feels wrong once you notice it. No insects, No coyotes, no wind. Caleb froze mid-adjustment on his camera. "Do you hear that?" I listened. "Nothing." "Exactly," he said. I walked a few meters off to stretch my legs and stopped cold. Footprints, fresh, not ours, emerged from the dark and walked in a slow, deliberate line toward the truck. The sand around them was untouched, no trail leading away, no explanation for how they'd gotten there. They simply ended, 3 feet from the driver's door. The stride was too long, the toes too narrow, the impressions too deep for any normal weight. "They don't stop because someone disappeared," Caleb said, refusing to look away from them. "They stop because whatever made them doesn't need footprints anymore. My Navajo co-worker told me, if you hear something calling you out here, or find tracks that make no sense, you don't investigate. You leave." Then a whistle drifted across the dark behind us. Soft, playful. It came again, closer, never loud enough to place, just close enough to know it had moved. We packed the truck in a rush, hands shaking, saying nothing. That's when the voice came. "Ethan?" It was my mother's voice, not similar, exact, down to the way she stretched my name when she wanted my attention. She'd been dead 6 years, but for one impossible moment I forgot that. And I took a step toward it, before Caleb slammed both hands into my chest and shoved me back against the truck. "Your mom never called you sweetheart," he said, and my blood went cold. She hadn't. She only ever called me Bug. The voice had copied everything except the one detail that mattered, and somewhere in the dark, something laughed, a sound like someone remembering how laughter worked after years of forgetting it. Caleb threw the last camera in and we peeled out down the dirt road. In the side mirror, something kept pace with the truck, not running, just gliding through the brush at 50 miles an hour without ever falling behind. Then my phone buzzed. No signal, no bars, and a missed call from Mom, a number disconnected since her funeral. It rang again. When it stopped, a voicemail appeared out of nowhere. I played it. Static, breathing, and then her voice, quiet and patient. "I can see you now." Something slammed into the side of the truck and sent us skidding to a stop near a ravine. Then came the scraping. Not claws, not nails. Something harder, like bone dragging across the metal, moving deliberately from the front bumper to the back. It stopped beside my window. I turned my head slowly. There was no face in the glass, only my own reflection, until it smiled, wider than my mouth had ever moved, wider than a mouth should move at all. Then it lifted one finger on the other side of the glass and tapped once, asking to be let in. It stepped sideways, out of the reflection entirely, and a shape unfolded from the dark just beyond the window. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin. "Don't look at its face," Caleb whispered, eyes locked on the road, "because that's how it learns." The radio crackled to life on its own. My own voice came out of the speakers, perfectly copied. "Caleb, open the door. It's safe now." Then it laughed, because it knew we'd recognized it. Caleb ripped the radio out by the wires. The laughter didn't stop. It just moved outside, circling us. Then the truck dipped under a weight that climbed onto the roof. Footsteps slow and curious, each one followed by a faint, wrong-angled clicking, like joints bending the way they shouldn't. Then silence. Ahead in the road stood a coyote. Too thin, standing too straight, its eyes reflecting no light at all. It opened its mouth and spoke in Caleb's voice, "Ethan." Then its front legs bent backward with a series of sickening cracks, and it rose onto 2 legs, taller than the truck, arms hanging past its knees, head tilted at an angle no neck should allow. It smiled and started walking toward us, unhurried, certain, like something that had never lost anything it wanted to catch. Caleb floored it. The figure didn't move. We drove straight through where it stood, and the headlights passed through empty air. Nothing there. Nothing behind us either, just empty desert and a cloud of dust. Then Caleb whispered, Don't look in the mirror. I looked anyway. Sitting in the back seat, where thousands of dollars of camera gear had been stacked seconds earlier, was a silhouette, hands folded neatly in its lap, face hidden in shadow. It leaned forward, close enough that I felt warm breath on the back of my neck and whispered in my own voice, "You finally looked." The truck swerved around oncoming headlights, and when I looked back, the seat was empty. Our gear was exactly where we'd left it. We didn't speak again until we reached a gas station, bright and ordinary and full of people who had never looked more comforting. Caleb went straight for the restroom. The cashier looked at me strangely. "You boys camping out there?" I nodded. He hesitated. "Then who's the third person?" I froze. "The tall one," he said, pointing at our truck, "standing in the bed of your pickup." I spun around. The truck was empty. When I turned back, his face had gone from confused to something closer to afraid. "Never mind," he said quietly. "I guess I was mistaken." We never spoke about that night again. Caleb sold his camera equipment within a week and moved across the country 6 months later without explaining why. I wish I could tell you it ended there. 3 nights ago, I woke up at exactly 2:17 a.m. to a single knock on my apartment door. No one was in the peephole. I stood there with my hand on the deadbolt while one voice begged me not to open it, and another, just as familiar, laughed softly and told me it was safe. Same breathing, same pauses, same fear. By sunrise, the hallway was empty, no footprints, no footage, and Caleb swore he'd been asleep in another state the whole night. Sometimes, just after midnight, I still hear a single knock. I never answer it, because if something can learn the voices of the people you love, how do you know you haven't already let it in?
How much do you know about skinwalkers? If you think they didn't exist, I must admit that I used to believe the same as you. But even if you think I'm crazy, I'll tell you that they are very real. And now, I will tell you when I saw one. That afternoon, I woke up 10 minutes before the alarm clock went off. The room was completely silent. My wife was away on a business trip and the house felt emptier than usual. I stretched out on the bed and struggled up, feeling the weight of the prosthesis on my right leg. It had been an accident at work, and although at first I liked the idea of not working, then I remembered that I couldn't do anything on crutches. The dog, Max, slept at the foot of the bed as usual, but something had made him nervous. He was growling a lot more than usual. At first, I thought he was just dreaming, but then he jumped up and ran out the basement door, barking. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Max's barking grew louder with each passing second. His claws scraped the wood as he tried to open it. There was nothing in the basement. Still, something made my dog, who usually didn't get upset over anything, react that way. I carefully climbed down and Max kept at my side, growling low. When I got to the basement, I turned on the light and looked around. Old boxes, tools, and forgotten furniture were still in place, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. "Max, there's nothing here." The dog was still restless, sniffing the air with bristling fur. I reached over and petted him to calm him down. Finally, he stopped growling, although he didn't relax completely. I decided he was paranoid for nothing. Maybe he had heard something on the street and had overreacted. I shrugged and went upstairs again, just as the alarm clock in my room began to go off. It was time to pick up my daughter from school. I trudged the 2 blocks to my daughter's school. Using crutches to get around was a bloody nightmare, especially in the summer heat. Still, I didn't complain. There was no time for regrets when I had a child depending on me.
Dad, can I play with Max when we get home?
Of course, honey, but don't bother him too much. Something about the way Max had reacted earlier still bothered me, but I didn't want to worry her. When we got home, Max greeted us at the door, but something about him wasn't right. He didn't bark or jump as usual. Instead, he stood still, staring at us, almost as if he was studying every move we made. His gaze was fixed and penetrating, so much so that for a moment I thought he was behaving like a stranger. My daughter, however, didn't seem to notice.
Come on, Max. Let's go.
I stood in the hallway, watching the dog. Max didn't move an inch, his eyes still locked on me, as if he was waiting for something. I thought to myself that he was being ridiculous. Surely he wanted me to give him more food, and he must have thought I was mad about what happened in the basement, and this was his way of asking for forgiveness. After a few hours, I started to worry about Max. Every time I moved or made a noise, I could feel his eyes on me, as if he was watching me. Eventually, I decided to ignore him and focused on making dinner. After a few minutes, my daughter came downstairs for dinner. Max was following her closely, but not in his usual playful way. He stood by her side, now staring right at her.
Dad, Max doesn't want to play with me. He just follows me around and stares at me.
It's okay, honey. Maybe he's tired. As I was setting the table, the lights in the house flickered once and then went out completely. We were in complete darkness. Stay here. I stood up and grabbed a flashlight from a nearby drawer. I turned it on and the light revealed Max's serious face, still watching us from the edge of the kitchen. My heart was pounding as I made my way to the basement. The only logical explanation was that the fuses had blown. As I reached the basement, I could hear a muffled sound, as if someone was moving around down there. This was no good. I couldn't go down there until I took action. I knew the best thing to do was to escape with my daughter, but maybe it was nothing, and if there was something, I had to take advantage of the fact that she was in the basement before she entered the house and hid somewhere. I know what everyone is thinking, and at the time, I didn't think about locking the man in the basement. But in a tight situation, no one can blame me for not doing the obvious. I told my daughter to go to her room, and I made sure the door to my daughter's room was securely locked and that Max was inside with her. Hey, buddy, go take care of her, okay? I went down to the basement with the flashlight, noticing that the sound had stopped. When I reached the top of the stairs, I shone the light on the stacked boxes and furniture. Suddenly, the flashlight picked up something on the floor. I cautiously moved forward and saw it clearly. It was Max, or at least what was left of him. His body was mangled, his fur covered in dried blood. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. That's when I heard my daughter scream from upstairs. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, despite the pain in my leg. When I reached her bedroom door, I found it closed, but I could hear her crying on the other side. I pulled on the handle with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. Sweetie, I'm here. Open the door. I tried to hit it with my body again and again until it finally gave way. When the door opened, what I saw took my breath away. Behind the door was Max, only that wasn't Max. That thing was standing on two legs with the mouth stretched into an inhuman grimace, gripping my daughter's arm with its teeth. My daughter stood there, eyes wide open, panic reflected in her gaze. Her arm dangled weakly from the creature's mouth, but she didn't scream, as if fear had paralyzed her. I tried to move forward, but the creature lowered its gaze to the arm I held as if it was considering biting harder. The creature did not react like an animal. It did not recoil or show signs of fear. Instead, it let go of my daughter's arm, allowing her to collapse to the ground and get back on all fours. Before I could move, the creature gave a look that seemed to taunt me, and with one swift, brutal moment, grabbed my daughter around the waist with its jaw and jumped out the window. I heard the glass shatter into 1,000 pieces, and my daughter's piercing screams faded along with the beast. I was paralyzed. I fell to my knees, unable to get up, crutches falling at my side. I tried to crawl towards the window, but I knew it was no use. There was no way to follow that thing. All I had left was the image of my daughter being dragged by that creature. When the police arrived, I couldn't articulate anything coherent. I told them what had happened, every detail, but it all sounded absurd. They searched the entire house, searched the basement where they found Max's body, but when they inspected the outside, there was no sign of my daughter or the creature. The officers tried to console me, saying they would send out search teams and that they would do everything they could do to find her, but their eyes said otherwise. They didn't believe me. They thought I was out of my mind, that I had done something with my daughter after I lost my mind. My daughter never appeared. They searched for days but found nothing, not a trace, not a clue. The case remained unsolved, and eventually the search stopped. I'm in a psychiatric hospital now. They say I'm here for my good, to protect me from myself. But I know the truth. I know that what I saw that night was real. My daughter was taken away by something that shouldn't exist, and no one believes me. I've been told that my wife stopped visiting me, unable to bear the thought that I've lost my mind, that I've done something to my daughter. The night they brought me here, I overheard the doctors talking among themselves. They think it was all a figment of my imagination, a nervous breakdown brought on by the stress of the accident. No one will ever believe me. I can't stop thinking about what happened to my daughter and where she might be now if she's still alive. I will never know. Sometimes I try to pretend that what happened was a lie, but it's getting harder and harder for me to say logical things. I guess I'm losing my mind. Although I often wonder, did this start happening before or after that night?
What is the strangest thing that has ever happened to you? Have you ever found something that threw away everything you believed? Something that you were convinced was just fables? Let me tell you that it has happened to me and my friends, but unfortunately, I am the only one who can tell the story. It all started with an invitation that no one expected. Jason, one of the more reserved guys in our group, suggested we spend the weekend at his cabin in the woods. He had never been the type to share his stuff. His cabin was his sanctuary, and he rarely talked about it. So we were all surprised when he proposed the plan. At first, we thought maybe he just wanted to unwind a bit, get away from the city, and take the opportunity to relax with friends. But there was something a bit odd about his attitude. Jason had always been a bit of a control freak, worried about someone breaking something or messing up his place. This time, however, he was strangely relaxed, almost excited about the idea of us all going. His change in attitude did not go unnoticed, but no one said anything. After all, maybe this was a unique opportunity we could never have again. So we agreed, and the plan stood. The trip was uneventful. We drove for a few hours until we reached the place. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere and was surrounded by a dense forest that we didn't know how far it extended. As soon as we arrived, Jason insisted that we explore the forest, but we were all tired from the trip. We told him we'd better do it the next day. He seemed a bit disappointed, which caught our attention even more. He was never one of those adventurous people who liked to get out of the house. Although at the time we were surprised for the best, maybe Jason wasn't as boring as we thought. We settled in, prepared some food, and started drinking. Laughter and stories took over the night, but there was something about Jason that got on my nerves. Every time I met his eyes, I felt like he was watching me in a strange way, like he was analyzing me. It was unsettling, but I laughed it off. Jason just laughed but continued to stare when I didn't see him. We stayed in the cabin even though Jason kept suggesting we go out into the woods. I could tell he wasn't happy with our decision to stay inside. Soon after, we all went to bed. We would have all the next morning to explore, although I wouldn't sleep that night. I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling, as if someone was watching me. And there he was, Jason in his bed, staring at me from across the room. His eyes seemed to glow in the dark as if reflecting the little light that came through the window. He didn't blink, didn't move a muscle. He just looked at me. I wanted to ask him what he was doing, but I felt strangely intimidated by my friend I had known since I was a kid. I looked down, trying to ignore him, and leaned back. I didn't want to appear paranoid. Maybe I was overreacting, or maybe Jason had had too much to drink. The next day, I woke up again to the screams of my friends. It was 4 a.m. I felt a momentary relief that Jason wasn't looking at me this time. However, when I went out to the dining room, I found my friends upset. One of them, Mark, was pale and shaking. "Hey man, are you okay?" "We couldn't find Jason or Tommy." It was at that moment that they told me everything. A few minutes before, one of them woke up to a noise and noticed that our friends were not there. We waited for them for a while, but they didn't come back. We looked all over the cabin. their things were still there, which made everything stranger. If they had gone for a walk, why didn't they call? Didn't they take anything with them? Why would they be out at this hour? We decided to go to the forest to look for them. After a while, we heard a scream from the trees in the distance. It was Tommy's voice. We ran in the direction where the scream came from, but when we arrived, the scene we found was as horrible as it was unexpected. Tommy's body was lying on the ground, gutted. But what was most disturbing was that, based on the condition of the body, it appeared to have been dead for several hours. We didn't understand how we could have heard his screams so clearly. In the distance, through the trees, I saw a figure moving quickly. It was Jason. He was moving deeper and deeper into the forest. We called his name, but he didn't respond. He just kept going as if he hadn't seen Tommy's body. We started to follow him at full speed. We had no idea we were heading into a trap. We moved deeper and deeper into the forest, but soon realized that we were losing Jason's trail. The atmosphere was getting darker, and a strange smell of damp earth and blood surrounded us. To be honest, I just wanted to get out of there. I was terrified. I couldn't stay another second in that place, and neither my friends. But we couldn't leave Jason like that, not after what had happened to Tommy. Suddenly, the sound of branches snapping all around us put us on alert. It was as if something big was moving through the trees. That wasn't Jason. That's when we saw it. Jason appeared again, but this time he wasn't walking like a normal person. He was moving like a spider, his limbs bent unnaturally as he glided along the ground. It couldn't be him. Something was wrong. Before we could react, he jumped on one of my friends, sinking his teeth into his neck. Blood splattered as my friend fell to the ground, dead in seconds. Unable to react to what was in front of us, Mark and I ran directionless, running deeper and deeper into the woods. I could hear my friend screaming in the distance, begging me not to leave him behind. None of this made any sense. That being identical to Jason had bitten his neck and killed him, there was no way he was screaming at us. Suddenly, a strange being appeared in our path. It wasn't Jason, but it wasn't something I recognized either. His pale skin and empty eyes made him look like a nightmare come true. Recognize that being. I was always a big fan of urban legends, and this being was just like the one in the Skinwalker photo that had been popularized on the internet. We didn't have time to stop and think, we just knew we had to run. We turned in another direction, trying to escape from this monster. Every time I looked back, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. That thing that was chasing us was closing the distance. With a stroke of luck, I reached the cabin and found the truck. But when I got there, I realized I was alone. Mark was gone. I didn't even want to think that something had happened to him or that he was lost. I got into the truck and was about to accelerate it. Then I heard it. It was Mark's voice, and it was coming from the woods. He was yelling at me in desperation, asking me to wait for him, not to leave without him, that he was being chased. At that moment, I had to make a decision. These beings were imitating the voices of my friends, but what if this was Mark? I couldn't make a decision. If I was wrong, my friend would die. I thought quickly as I listened to the voice getting closer and closer, and that's when I made the most impulsive decision I've ever made in my life. I started the engine and accelerated the truck as fast as I could. I drove without stopping, fear still pulsing in my veins. I didn't look back once, afraid to see Jason or the other monster chasing me, or at least that's what I told myself. What I was really afraid of was seeing Mark, and knowing that I made the wrong decision. The road back to town seemed endless, but I finally reached a safer area where I could stop and try to figure out what had happened. I tried to call the police, but my phone had no signal in that area. It was then that reality hit me like a bucket of cold water. I had left my friends behind, with no idea what had happened to them. Guilt and fear hit me hard, but I knew I couldn't go back. What I had seen in the forest was not of this world, and I could not face it again. I had already escaped. Why would I go back? To die like them? I survived, and that's a lot more than what had to have happened. When I finally got through to the authorities, I told them what had happened, even though I knew they wouldn't believe me. I was surprised when they told me that they had received similar reports in that area in the past. It seems that in the area around the cabin, they were much more open to these things than I was, although they still reported what happened as disappearances. They only found Jason's corpse, so I don't know if that voice was Mark's. To this day, I still wonder if I made the right decision. Although, given the circumstances, I suppose there was no right decision. They were just decisions. And I made the decision that made me be here now, alive, and telling you this story. Oh, and one more thing. Remember I told you that they found Jason's body? Because of that body, the police suspected me for a moment and thought I was lying to them. Do you know why? Because they found out that that body had been dead longer than the one I told them about. You know what that means, don't you? That he was with us, that he invited us to the cabin. It wasn't Jason, and it never was.
I started working at the Cheesecake Factory in Old Town Pasadena about a year ago. I was a line cook, mostly doing prep and cleaning the grill before closing. It wasn't bad. The pay sucked, but the staff was decent. The only thing that made the place weird was the tunnel under the building. Everyone called it the dungeon. It wasn't part of the restaurant that customers saw. You had to go through a metal door in the back hallway, then down a narrow staircase that smelled like bleach and mold. The managers said it was used for storage decades ago, before the restaurant took over the building, but no one really went down there. The first time I went, it was to grab an old crate of plates. The light flickered nonstop, and the walls were covered in what looked like old grease stains. I could hear something dripping somewhere. The air felt heavy, like the place hadn't been opened in years. I grabbed the crate and got out fast. When I came back up, my coworker Troy asked if I'd heard the kid. I told him no. He said everyone who stayed there late had heard a little girl laughing near the bottom of the stairs. At first, I thought it was bullshit. But after a few nights, I started hearing things too. A metal clang, a faint whisper. Once I swear I heard someone call my name. A few weeks later, after closing, I told my friends about it. We were drinking behind the building and I said there was a tunnel under the restaurant that everyone said was haunted. They laughed at first, but then Greg, who loved all that ghost hunting crap, said we should go down there. I told them it was locked most of the time, but I had a spare key for cleaning shifts. They got excited like idiots. Greg brought his phone to record everything, and his girlfriend, Dana, came too. She said it would make a perfect TikTok video. The last one to join was Luis, another guy from the kitchen. He wasn't into ghosts, but he didn't want to look scared. Before we went in, I hesitated. I remembered how the tunnel sounded at night, how it always felt like someone was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. But I didn't want to look paranoid, so I unlocked the door and turned on the flashlight of my phone. The smell hit us first. It was worse than I remembered, like wet cardboard mixed with rotten meat. Dana gagged. Greg laughed and told her to stop being dramatic. We started walking down. For a few seconds, everything was quiet except our footsteps. Then came the sound, something scraping on the floor somewhere ahead of us. We stopped halfway down the tunnel. The light from the stairway was barely visible behind us. The scraping stopped. Luis whispered that maybe it was a rat, but rats don't make footsteps. We stood still listening. Then, a low voice echoed from the end of the tunnel. Just a single word. Couldn't tell what it said. It sounded like it came from someone with a dry throat. Greg whispered that it must be some speaker system or maybe a homeless guy. Dana wanted to leave. Greg said no, this was the best part. He walked ahead holding his phone high like he was filming a movie. I followed him because the light from his phone was the only one that reached farther in. The deeper we went, the more trash there was. Empty cans, broken boxes, torn blankets. Someone had been living down there. We turned a corner and found a small room. There were 3 mattresses on the floor, all filthy. One of them had bloodstains. On the wall, someone had written with red paint or maybe blood, "No one comes back." Dana freaked out and ran toward the stairs. I yelled at her to wait. Then, something moved behind the mattress. For a moment, I thought it was just a pile of clothes. Then I saw a hand, thin, filthy, trembling. Greg stepped closer and pointed the flashlight at it. A man crawled out slowly. His skin looked gray, his eyes bloodshot. He was barefoot and wearing a torn jacket. He stared at us like an animal trying to decide if we were food. Greg told him we didn't mean any harm. The man tilted his head, then started mumbling something I couldn't understand. Before Greg could say another word, another figure jumped out from behind. This one grabbed Greg's arm and slammed him into the wall. The sound of his skull hitting concrete echoed down the tunnel. I froze. Luis tried to help him, but the second man turned on him and stabbed him with something sharp, maybe a broken piece of metal. I heard Dana screaming somewhere near the stairs. The flashlight rolled across the floor and stopped next to me. I could see Greg's face, his mouth open, eyes blank. I ran. I didn't think, just ran toward the exit. But before I could reach the stairs, a small voice came from behind me. The voice was quiet, but clear. A young girl saying, "Don't leave." I stopped for a second. There, standing near the corner, was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9. Her clothes were filthy, her hair tangled. She looked scared, but her eyes didn't look normal. She wasn't crying. She was staring at me like she knew exactly who I was. I wanted to tell her to come with me, but I couldn't move closer. My body just froze, not from fear, from confusion. Why was she down there? Then I saw someone behind her, the same man who had attacked Greg. He stepped into the light, holding a pipe. The girl didn't even turn around. She just kept staring at me. He said something to her, something about feeding and keeping the noise down. Then he looked at me and smiled. His teeth were cracked and black. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't stop, even when I tripped. I didn't look back. When I reached the top, I slammed the door and locked it. I could hear footsteps running below, then a thud, then silence. The police came about 30 minutes later. I told them there were people living under the restaurant, that they had attacked my friends. They didn't believe me until they went down. They came back up, pale as ghosts. They found Greg's and Luis's bodies in that room, along with old cans of food and trash everywhere. But the man and the girl were gone. One officer said that they might have used the service tunnel that connects to another building nearby. They searched for 2 days and found nothing. The door to the tunnel was sealed after that. Management said it was a liability issue. No one mentioned the girl again. I tried to go back to work a week later, but every time I walked past that hallway, I thought I could hear something. Faint metal clanging, footsteps, a soft humming. The police never found the other brother. They said maybe he died down there too, hidden somewhere in the dark. But I knew what I saw. The girl wasn't a ghost. She was alive, and she wasn't trapped. She stayed there because that was her home. I quit a month later. Couldn't stand being in that building anymore. Every time someone mentioned the Cheesecake Factory, I thought of that tunnel, the smell, and the sound of Greg's skull hitting the wall. A few nights ago, I saw a TikTok about the place. Some guy said he worked there now, that he'd heard strange noises coming from under the floor after closing. He even filmed part of the hallway before management told him to stop. In the background, near the bottom of the frame, I could see something move. For a second, the camera caught a small figure standing at the end of the corridor. A little girl in dirty clothes.
I used to go to the shopping mall every Friday night. It wasn't about shopping, just routine. The air conditioning, the empty halls, the hum of closing stores. It was the only quiet place I could walk without thinking too much. That night was like every other night, until I saw something new near the food court. A booth I hadn't noticed before, right between a souvenir shop and a juice stand. The sign above it said, "The Cheesecake Factory," in shiny gold letters. No one else seemed to care. It hadn't been there yesterday. A woman stood behind the counter, old, neatly dressed, wearing a pink apron. Her hair was white and tied up in a bun. She smiled the moment I looked her way, too quickly, like she'd been waiting for someone to notice her.
"Last slice of the night, dear. You look like you could use something sweet."
Her voice was calm, warm even. I hesitated, but the smell coming from that display case was unreal, sweet, buttery, heavy. I walked closer. The booth was spotless. There were no price tags, no brand logos, nothing but a small fridge full of perfect slices. They didn't look real. Each one looked like it had been sculpted and painted instead of baked. The old woman tapped the glass.
"This one's special. You'll like it. Best ingredients in the city."
It was a raspberry cheesecake, or that's what it looked like. She carefully slid one slice onto a plate that didn't match the rest of the setup. Real porcelain, cracked at one corner, like it had been reused too many times. When I asked if it was new, she smiled again, a little wider.
"We open whenever we're needed."
The card reader didn't work, so I paid in cash. She counted the bills slowly, not taking her eyes off me. The booth had no receipt printer, no cash register, no decoration. Just her, the fridge, and those cakes. She handed me the plate, her fingers brushing mine. They were cold. I sat down at one of the nearby tables. The mall was almost empty now. The janitor was sweeping in the distance, and a security guard was talking on his phone near the entrance. I could hear the refrigerator humming softly behind me. The first bite was thick, heavier than I expected. The sweetness was there, but it faded too quickly, replaced by something slimy. I thought maybe it was just a new recipe, something fancy like an imported ingredient I didn't know. It wasn't bad exactly, just strange. I told myself not to overthink it and took a second bite. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to understand what that weird taste was. Maybe I didn't want to look stupid in front of her. The second bite had something inside of it, rubbery, hard to chew. When I bit down, a metallic flavor spread across my tongue. I spat it onto a napkin. The color wasn't raspberry red. It was darker. The piece inside looked fibrous, like skin. My stomach clenched so hard it hurt. I dropped the fork, bent forward, and threw up all over the table. The old woman didn't move at first. She just watched me, still smiling. I wiped my mouth with my sleeve, shaking. My hands wouldn't stay still. What the hell was that? But I know what it was. That flavor was pretty distinctive. It tasted like blood. She didn't answer. She leaned on the counter, resting her chin on her hand like she was watching a child misbehave. Then she laughed. It wasn't loud, it was quiet, broken, the kind of laugh that sounds more like coughing.
"Only natural ingredients. I think that was a kid. Or his parents. Impossible to know, to be honest."
I gagged again, just hearing her voice. I backed away, bumping into a chair. My stomach kept turning, my throat raw from vomiting. I couldn't look at the plate again. The slice was still there, a bite missing, a smear of red across the cream. She didn't wait for me to say anything else. She turned her back, pulled something from under the counter, a small bag, maybe her purse, and started walking away. I remember the sound of her shoes on the floor, slow, calm, like she didn't care I was still there. By the time I looked up again, she was gone. The booth lights were dimming and the hum of the fridge was fading. I didn't chase her. I couldn't even stand properly. My legs felt like they weren't connected to me anymore. All I could think about was what had been inside my mouth. I kept spitting, dry heaving, trying to erase the taste, but it wouldn't go away. It stayed under my tongue, metallic and sweet at the same time. I grabbed a napkin and wiped my face. The piece I had spat out was still there. I forced myself to look closer. It wasn't fruit, and it wasn't dough. It looked like a small strip of tissue, like something cut from a person. I dropped it immediately, stepped back, and almost slipped on my own vomit. The lights above the booth flickered once. When I turned around, the display case was empty. Every slice was gone. The fridge door was slightly open, cold air spilling out. There was no sign of the woman, no sign of anything being cleaned or moved. I walked away slowly, breathing through my mouth to stop the nausea. My eyes kept watering from the smell. It was sweet again now, almost pleasant. But every breath made me gag harder. I didn't tell anyone that night. I just left. The guard was gone, the janitor too. The mall doors were half closed. Outside, the street was quiet, empty. My mouth still burned from the bile, and my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold my phone. It's been months. I still can't eat anything sweet. Even the smell of vanilla makes me gag. Doctors say it's psychological. Trauma response, they call it. But I know it's not just that. The taste never left. It sits under my tongue, faint but constant, like it's part of me now. Sometimes when I sleep, I wake up thinking I bit into something again, something soft, something alive. Last week I woke up to a smell coming from the kitchen. I thought I was imagining it, but when I opened the fridge, there was a small slice of cheesecake sitting on a plate. It was a normal cheesecake, and the smell was clearly an act of my imagination. But something so normal, like watching a slice of cheesecake, ruined my whole month.
I started working at the Cheesecake Factory in Pasadena in late 2016. I wasn't supposed to stay long. It was just a job to cover rent and keep my head above water. The kitchen was loud, full of steam, oil spattering everywhere, and people yelling orders. It wasn't hell, but it was close. The smell of cheesecake stopped meaning anything after a week. I got used to seeing the same customers. There was this guy who came in every other day. Tall, skinny, always in the same green jacket, even in hot weather. He ordered the same thing. Chicken Madeira and 2 slices of white chocolate raspberry cheesecake to go. Never smiled, always paid in cash. I didn't know his name, but we called him Green Jacket Guy. The weird thing was how he'd just sit there after eating, sometimes for hours. Not looking at his phone, not talking to anyone, just staring at his glass of water. Once I tried to make small talk, asked if everything was okay with the food. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Said he liked it too much to leave. I laughed awkwardly and walked away. That was the last time I spoke to him for a while. At first, no one cared. He was just another lonely customer. We all have our habits. But after that night, I wish I'd taken him more seriously. It started one Thursday in February 2017. The place was packed, people waiting at the door, Valentine's week rush. Orders were piling up, tickets printing non-stop. I was behind the counter taking to-go orders when Green Jacket Guy showed up again. He looked agitated, kept checking his receipt. He said his order from the day before had been wrong. He claimed we gave him something else entirely. I told him we could fix it or refund him, but he got angrier. His voice rose shaking like he'd been rehearsing that complaint all night. The manager came out, tried to calm him down. The guy started cursing under his breath, accusing us of mocking him. When security approached, he shoved his food onto the floor and stormed out. His eyes locked on me before leaving, and there was something off in his stare, like he was trying to remember my face. The next morning, he was standing outside the restaurant before we opened, just waiting. I saw him through the glass doors staring straight in. He didn't look angry this time. He just smiled wide, like he'd forgiven us. That afternoon, around 4, we were at half capacity. I was taking dishes back to the kitchen when I noticed someone in the corner booth. Someone I didn't recognize. A man, mid-30s, gray hoodie, baseball cap low over his face. He was alone, fiddling with a large paper bag on the floor beside him. For a few minutes, I didn't think much of it. People brought shopping bags all the time, but then he kept looking at the bag, whispering something to himself. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just stared at that thing like he was guarding it. Something about the way he breathed made me uneasy. Heavy, uneven breaths. His hands trembled slightly and he kept glancing at the exit. I wiped a nearby table, pretending not to look. Then he noticed me. He smiled. Small, controlled, almost polite. He gestured for me to come closer. I walked up, cautious. "Heard this place had good cheesecake. You work here long?" His tone was calm, but there was a strange rhythm in his voice, like he was trying to sound normal. "Yeah, a couple months. Everything okay with your order?" He chuckled softly. "Oh, I'm not ordering today. I'm waiting for someone." He nodded toward the bag. His fingers tapped it gently like it was alive. I froze. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't say what. The air wasn't thick or tense. It was the silence between his words that bothered me. "You should go back to work, but don't move too quickly. Sudden moves makes me nervous." My stomach tightened. I looked at his bag again, then at his hands. They were shaking worse now. "Listen, man, if you're not eating here, I might have to..." He cut me off. "Call security?" "Yeah, I figured you'd say that." He leaned closer. "If anyone tries to touch this bag, we'll all stop existing in the same second." I stared at him, trying to process what he said. My hands felt numb. "Is that a bomb?" He didn't answer, just smiled. His teeth were clenched. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. The restaurant noise faded behind me, people laughing, dishes clattering, but it all sounded distant. "Don't worry, it's not meant for you. I just need them to understand." I didn't ask who he meant. I was scared that if I did, he'd explode right there. He motioned toward the counter. "Go tell your manager not to call the police. If I see a single uniform outside, this place becomes dust." I moved slowly to the counter, trying not to draw attention. My coworkers were busy, unaware of what was happening. I whispered to the manager, but before he could react, the man stood up and raised his voice. "No one leaves!" Everyone stopped talking. Forks dropped. He was shaking, holding a small device in his hand, something with wires. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just need to fix something that broke." The customers started screaming, running toward the back exit, but he yelled louder. "If you move, we all die!" He began crying, sudden, uncontrollable sobs. "I used to come here every day. I liked it here. You people were nice. You didn't even look at me like I was garbage. But then you kicked me out. Why'd you do that?" That's when I realized who he was. Green jacket guy, only now in a hoodie, thinner, paler, eyes red and wild. I tried talking to him, my voice shaking. "You don't have to do this, please." He laughed and wiped his face with his sleeve. "I already did it. The only thing keeping this place standing is my thumb." I took a step forward, slow, hoping he wouldn't notice. "Let me help you, man. You said you want to fix it, right? Let me call someone." He looked at me like a child lost in a mall. For a moment, I thought he'd let me. "Call security. Tell them to come here." He was trembling harder. Sweat dripped from his forehead. I nodded and ran toward the service door. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear anything. I told the security guard what was happening. He grabbed his radio, but before he could speak, we heard a sharp beep. A single short, high-pitched tone coming from the dining area. Then silence. I sprinted back. The booth was empty. The bag was still there, blinking red. The man was gone. People were screaming, running, overturning chairs. My legs wouldn't stop shaking, but I forced myself to move closer, scanning the floor, trying to find him. Maybe he'd gone to the restroom, maybe... The beeping got faster. I yelled for everyone to get down. The next second, the light swallowed everything. The sound hit me before the pain. My ears rang, my body hit the floor, and the world turned white and gray. I couldn't move. There was screaming, metal falling, sprinklers going off. The smell of burned plastic filled my nose. My right arm was numb, and I couldn't tell if I was bleeding. When I opened my eyes again, the walls were blackened, tables shattered. The booth where the bag had been was gone. Just gone. Paramedics came minutes later. They dragged me out through the side door. I remember seeing the front windows blown out, smoke rising into the street. 20 people hurt, no one dead, somehow. The man was never found. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Burns on my arm, hearing damage, mild concussion. Reporters came asking questions, but I didn't want to talk. Police said the bomb was a homemade device. Nails, wires, fertilizer. Crude but effective. They said the man probably ran before it detonated. Maybe he planned to die with it but changed his mind. Maybe he wanted to watch it from outside. Every night since, I dream of that booth. I see him sitting there smiling, tapping that bag. When I wake up, I hear a faint beep in my ear that never goes away. I went back once, months later. The place had been rebuilt. New tables, new lights, new walls. But when I stood near the corner booth, I could swear I smelled burnt plastic again. A manager asked if I was looking for a table. I told him no.
Every Friday, my parents left me at Grandma Vera's apartment. She lived alone on the 4th floor of an old building in St. Petersburg. The hallway always smelled like boiled cabbage and something metallic, like rust or blood. I never liked it, but my parents said she got lonely, and I was her only grandchild. Grandma was always polite, but strange. She had this stiff smile that didn't move her eyes. She cooked too much food, spoke too softly, and always wore gloves, even inside. Her apartment was filled with knitted blankets and sweaters stacked neatly in piles. Each one had a tag sewn on it with a name, usually a neighbor's name. The first time I asked her about it, she said she liked knitting gifts. But then I realized some of those neighbors hadn't been around lately. I didn't see Miss Ivanova watering her plants anymore, or Mr. Petrov walking his dog. When I asked Granny where they went, she just said, "They moved away, darling." By my 6th visit, there was at least 10 new blankets, each one different colors, different patterns. I noticed one folded on the couch that had a dark stain near the corner. When I touched it, it felt stiff. She quickly took it from my hands and said it was an old one. I didn't believe her. That night, while we had dinner, Grandma talked about people leaving the building. She said she missed having company. Then she looked at me for a long time and smiled. I tried to change the subject, but she asked if I liked the red sweater she made for me. I hadn't even noticed it hanging by the door. My name was stitched on the front in perfect cursive. I asked when she made it. She said she stayed up late the night before. I didn't remember her being awake when I went to bed, but maybe I hadn't noticed. Before going to sleep, I walked past her sewing room. The door was slightly open. Inside, I saw her working on something big, her hands moving slowly. I could hear the soft click of the knitting needles. I stepped closer and noticed the yarn glistened under the lamp. It was wet. I froze. A drop fell to the floor. It was dark red. She turned her head, just a little, enough for me to see her eyes. They looked dead, flat, like she wasn't even human for that second. I went back to bed without a sound. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a faint tapping sound. It came from her sewing room again. I sat on the bed, heart pounding, and listened. The tapping turned into scraping, like metal dragging on tile. Then I heard a humming, a quiet lullaby. For almost 5 minutes, I tried to convince myself to stay in bed, but the noises grew louder, like she was struggling with something heavy. I had to know. I got up, stepped into the hallway, and walked toward the room. When I reached the door, I looked through the crack. Grandma was sitting at her table, knitting with long silver needles, but her hands were shaking. The thread ran down to a bucket beside her. I could see something moving inside it. I stepped closer, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then I realized the thread wasn't yarn. It was a long strip of skin. I gasped before I could stop myself. The chair screeched as she stood up. Her head turned sharply toward the door.
Who's there?
I ran. I didn't even think. I bolted down the hallway, opened the first door I saw, and threw myself inside. The basement stairs creaked as I went down 2 at a time. My legs were shaking so hard I nearly fell. At the bottom, I fumbled for the light switch. When the bulb flickered on, my stomach dropped. There was a body on the table, fresh, still bleeding. A man's head wrapped in cloth, the rest stripped and half sewn, like she was turning him into something. I backed away, pressing against the wall, covering my mouth to stop a scream. The smell was unbearable, rot and iron. My vision blurred for a second. I thought I was going to pass out. Then I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate. She was searching. The floorboards creaked with every step she took.
Where are you, sweetheart?
I stayed completely still, not even breathing. The light flickered. I looked around, searching for a hiding spot. There was an old wardrobe in the corner. I ran and climbed inside, closing the door just enough to peek through the crack. The basement door opened. I saw her silhouette at the top of the stairs, holding one of those long knitting needles. It gleamed in the light. She started walking down, humming again. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. The humming stopped. She stood in the middle of the room, sniffing the air like an animal. Then she smiled.
I know you saw him. It's okay, but weren't supposed to.
She dragged the needle across the table, tracing the edge of the corpse.
He is just sleeping. He is very ill, so he took a nap. Want to see it? He is even snoring.
Her voice cracked when she said that. Then she looked right at the wardrobe. My throat tightened. She took one step toward me. Then something fell upstairs. A loud crash. She froze, looked up, and hurried back to the main floor. The door slammed. I waited almost a full minute before moving. I opened the wardrobe slowly, stepped out, and tried to breathe quietly. I needed to leave. I went upstairs trying to make no noise. The hallway was empty. I saw the front door and ran to it, but when I tried the handle, it didn't move. Locked. The key was gone. I looked around, panicking. The apartment was silent now. Too silent. Then I saw her shadow moving in the kitchen doorway.
You shouldn't play games with me, darling. Even Grandma can lose her patience.
I ducked behind the couch. Her steps were faster now, uneven, angry. She threw open drawers, slammed doors, muttering under her breath. I crawled toward the hallway, trying to stay low. When I reached the small table by the entrance, I saw the keys hanging there. I went straight to the door. I inserted the keys and opened the door, but before I could leave, something cold touched the back of my neck.
Going somewhere?
Suddenly, a cloth pressed over my face. The smell hit instantly. Sweet, chemical, heavy. I struggled, clawing at her arm, but everything went dark. I woke up in my bed. Sunlight was coming through the curtains. My parents were standing near the window, talking to Grandma. She looked calm, smiling, serving them tea. I sat up fast. My head was pounding. The sweater she made me was folded neatly on the blanket. My name stitched perfectly across the chest. I screamed, told them what she did, about the body in the basement, the blood, the thread, everything. My parents stared at me, then looked at her. She laughed, a small, dry laugh that didn't sound real.
Oh, poor thing. He's always had such an imagination.
I yelled again, begged them to check the basement. My father sighed and opened the door, motioning for me to show him. I ran downstairs, my chest tight with fear and anger. The basement was empty. The table was clean, the floor washed. No blood, no smell, nothing. She followed us down, still smiling. I lost. We left that afternoon. My mother hugged her goodbye like nothing happened. On the way home, no one spoke to me. Grandma died 3 years later. Heart failure. When they cleaned her apartment, the police found a locked trunk under her bed. Inside were 24 sweaters, each folded perfectly, each with a name stitched on it. One of them had mine. No one ever figured out what happened to the missing neighbors. The case was closed without answers. But sometimes I dream about her sitting in that chair again, humming, knitting with that same bloody thread. And in the dream, she always stops, looks up, and says my name. This story is based on the real-life crimes of Tamara Sanzanova, known in Russia as the Granny Reaper. Between 2000 and 2015, she was suspected of killing and dismembering several of her neighbors and tenants in St. Petersburg. Authorities found detailed diary entries in her home describing the murders, along with evidence linking her to multiple disappearances in her building. What shocked investigators most was how ordinary her life appeared on the surface. She kept her apartment clean, smiled to neighbors, and spent her days knitting and shopping for groceries. Behind that routine, she stored human remains in her home and used kitchen tools to dismember her victims.
I was 16 when my parents decided to move back into my grandmother's house. She lived alone after my grandfather died, and lately she'd started forgetting things. Some days she left the stove on. Other days she called my dad by my uncle's name, who had been dead for 10 years. Still, she didn't want to leave her home, and my parents said it would be temporary. The house wasn't huge, but it had too many rooms for just 4 people. The kind of place that still smelled like old perfume and dust, like time had stopped somewhere in the 70s. The clocks all ticked, but none of them showed the right hour. Except one, the big wall clock in the dining room. My grandmother said she trusted that one because it was never wrong. The first week was fine. She talked to herself sometimes, muttering while stirring her tea or watching TV, but I ignored it. I thought that's what being old looked like. What bothered me the most was the way she looked at that clock every night before going to bed, like she was waiting for something. The first time I asked about it, she smiled, almost proud, and said,
"If I sleep before the minute hand passes, she'll call me, and I'm not ready to go."
At first, we all laughed it off. My mom said old people have strange superstitions. My dad just turned up the TV volume, but every night my grandmother would sit on the same chair in front of the dining room clock, her eyes fixed on the second hand, whispering under her breath. She'd wait until exactly 3:17 a.m., then quietly go to bed. The third night I couldn't sleep, so I went to get some water. I saw her silhouette sitting there, still as stone. I called her name, but she didn't react. Her breathing was slow, almost mechanical. The tick of the clock filled the whole room. When the minute hand reached the mark, she blinked once, stood up, and left without a word. It started to bother me more after that. During the day, she'd talk like everything was normal, but at night she'd whisper things that made no sense. Once I caught her talking to the reflection of the window as if someone was standing outside.
I can't keep her waiting too long. She gets angry when I'm late.
I told my parents, but they said it was just confusion, maybe dementia. They told me not to scare her, but I wasn't sure who was scaring who anymore. A week later, I decided I wanted to see what really happened at 317. I stayed in bed with the lights off, listening to every sound the house made. At 3 sharp, I heard her door creak open. Her steps were slow, dragging, the soft tap of slippers on the old wooden floor. My heart started pounding so loud I was afraid she'd hear it. She walked toward the dining room, and a faint light came from under the door. I waited a minute, then got up and followed her. The dining room light was on, just like always. She sat there, facing the clock. Only this time, she wasn't alone. The chair opposite hers was pulled out slightly as if someone had been sitting there. I froze by the door, trying not to make a sound. She smiled at the empty seat.
You're early tonight.
The clock ticked, louder and louder, until I couldn't tell if it was real or just inside my head. I wanted to back away, but my foot hit the edge of a chair. The sound echoed across the room. My grandmother turned around slowly. Her eyes looked pale, unfocused, but her smile stayed frozen in place. She stood up, and her movements were stiff, unnatural, like her joints didn't work the same way anymore. I whispered her name, but her voice wasn't hers when she spoke back.
She's not here right now. You shouldn't be awake.
It was her mouth, but it wasn't her voice. The tone was deeper, dry, like someone else was speaking through her. I stepped back, but she started walking toward me. Each step sounded heavier than the last.
Go to bed, child. I'm here for her, not for you.
Her eyes flicked to the clock. The second hand trembled on the 17. I reached for the light switch, but before I could touch it, she was really close to me. I froze, not from fear, but because I didn't know what to do. She grabbed the dining table and threw it like it was cardboard. It slammed against the wall, exploded into pieces. I stumbled back, frozen. She was on me before I could blink. Her hand swung across my face, and the hit was so hard that I hit the floor instantly. My ear rang, my mouth filled with blood. She leaned down close, her breath hot and trembling.
See? Now you can't leave.
I crawled backward, and she laughed. High, broken laughter, like something inside her had snapped for good. I ran. She followed, screaming my name in a voice I'd never heard before. Objects flew, chairs, frames, glass. She was everywhere, faster than she should have been. I locked myself in the bathroom, pushing the door with my whole body. She hit it again and again, yelling words I didn't understand. The wood cracked. Then silence. I stayed still, breathing through my hand to keep quiet. After a few seconds, I heard my parents shouting from the other side. I opened the door. The hallway was destroyed. She was gone. Through the window, I saw her, sprinting into the yard, barefoot, her hair whipping around her face. She looked back once, grinning. Then she vanished into the dark. A few minutes later, while the police were coming, the house was silent, except for the broken clock still ticking in the dining room. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table. They looked pale, like they hadn't slept in days. My dad spoke first. He told me my grandmother had suffered from dissociative identity disorder for years, long before I was born. She'd been stable for a long time, but recently she stopped taking her medication without telling anyone. They thought she was fine. She wasn't. He said that when she stopped taking her pills, she began talking to the lady again, the same one she used to see during her worst episodes. My mom said they hadn't wanted to worry me, that they thought she was just confused because of her age. Everything made sense then. The voice, the strength, the way she changed completely. It wasn't my grandmother who hit me. It was whoever she became when she stopped fighting that other part of her. They searched for her all night, but she never came back. Not that night. Not ever again. Every other day, I had to visit my grandma. Mom said she needed company, and since she didn't trust nurses, I was the one who had to check on her. Grandma Evelyn was independent, stubborn, and always left her door unlocked. She used to say,
"If someone wants to steal from me, they'll only get expired pills and cat food."
That Thursday was no different. I took the bus, went up to the 4th floor, and expected to find her reading the newspaper in her armchair. But when I turned the handle, the door didn't move. Locked. That never happened. I knocked softly first, then louder. Nothing. The hallway was quiet except for the flickering light at the end of it. I called her name. No answer. The TV wasn't on, the cat wasn't meowing, and there wasn't a single sound from inside. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what. I pulled out my phone to call her. She didn't pick up. Then, as I was about to dial my mom, my phone vibrated. It was Grandma. Her voice was rough when I answered. She barely spoke.
Honey, I'm sorry. I fell asleep. My throat hurts. Can't talk much. I left the spare key under the mat."
I hesitated. Grandma never locked the door, and leaving a key under the mat wasn't something she'd ever done. Still, her voice sounded weak, old, exhausted. I told her I'd come in quietly and let her rest. She just muttered something I didn't understand and hung up. I crouched down, lifted the mat, and there it was, a small brass key. My fingers shook a little as I picked it up. I told myself she was fine, just sick. But as I put the key into the lock, the silence in that hallway felt heavier, thicker. I didn't even know why I was whispering when I said, "Grandma, I'm coming in." The door creaked open. The air inside was still, stale. The TV was off and her favorite lamp flickered weakly, like it hadn't been turned on in days. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me. Then I heard it. A voice calling my name. Low and rough, coming from her bedroom. The voice sounded painful, like she was forcing it through a throat full of gravel. I walked toward the sound. Every step made the floor groan, and for some reason, I kept looking over my shoulder, as if expecting someone to be standing there. The door to her bedroom was half closed. I pushed it open, saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, facing the window. Her back was turned to me, and a blanket covered most of her head. "Grandma, are you okay?" No answer. Her breathing was uneven, almost like a growl. I took another step closer. She flinched slightly when I spoke again. "Do you need me to call Mom?" Then that same raspy voice said,
"No, sweetheart. Just go home. Come back later."
For a moment, I almost laughed. It didn't sound like her. Not really. It was too deep, too forced, like someone pretending to sound sick. I said she was being dramatic, told her I'd make her a cup of tea or soup. She didn't move, didn't even look at me. That's when I noticed something on the floor, under the bed. A shape. At first I thought it was her cat, but when I bent down to take a closer look, I saw fingers. Pale fingers. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. The nails were chipped, the skin grayish. The hand was motionless. I stared at it, frozen, trying to make sense of it. Then I looked up. The person on the bed was still sitting there, still facing away from me. My chest tightened. I stood up slowly, taking a step back. "Grandma?" The person on the bed twitched, then turned slightly, just enough for me to see part of a face. Rubbery, pale, with a badly fitted wig sliding down the forehead. It wasn't my grandmother. It was a man, young, maybe 30, wearing her nightgown and a mask made from what looked like latex and makeup. Before I could scream, he stood up abruptly, pulling the blanket off his shoulders. His voice was low, shaking.
"Don't go yet. You just got here."
He smiled, but the smile didn't match the rest of his face. The latex cracked near his cheek. I ran. I sprinted for the front door, but he was faster. Somehow he was already there, standing in front of it, still in that half-ruined disguise. He was taller than I expected, but he stood hunched, still pretending to be fragile.
"Sit down, sweetheart. Let's have some tea first."
I shouted at him to move, tried to push him aside, but his hands grabbed my arms, cold and trembling. He didn't squeeze hard. He didn't need to. I couldn't even move. He walked me back toward the kitchen like I was a lost child. The table was already set. 2 cups, sugar, milk, steam still rising from the teapot. That moment lasted too long. The ticking of the clock, the slow scraping of his chair as he sat down. I stayed standing, my back against the wall. He poured tea for both of us, spilling a bit over the edge.
"You're a good girl for visiting your grandma."
The mask shifted when he spoke. His voice cracked, sometimes high, sometimes low, as if he couldn't decide what tone to use. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He stirred his tea, then pushed a cup toward me.
"Drink. It's rude to waste tea."
The smell of it was wrong. Metallic, like rust and dirt. I didn't move. His hand twitched, and for the first time, I saw his eyes through the slit in the mask. Empty, wide, shaking with something that wasn't entirely anger or madness, just absence. Minutes passed. He drank his tea, still pretending to be gentle, pretending to be her. He even asked me about school, about Mom, about the cat. I just nodded. My voice wouldn't come out. When he finished his cup, he stood up and fixed the wig on his head.
"See? Nothing to be scared of. You can go now."
I didn't believe him, but I left. I ran out of that apartment and didn't look back. I came back an hour later with 2 police officers and Mom. I kept telling them he was still there, that there was someone pretending to be Grandma. The officers kicked the door open and entered first. The lights were still on. the tea still on the table. The man was gone. Every room was empty. The drawers were open, the bed undone, the window wide. But the smell of old blood and mold, was impossible to ignore. I walked into the kitchen. The chairs were still facing each other. The officers were checking the rooms when I saw it. A figure sitting at the table, slumped forward, gray and silent. Grandma. She was dressed the same way he had been. Nightgown, wig, slippers. Her eyes half open, mouth stiff. The teacup was still in her hand. The other chair, the one I had refused to sit in, was empty. The man had placed her there before leaving, like she'd hosted that tea party herself. No one ever captured that man. No one knows who he was or how he entered the building. The only thing I know is that he took my granny, and I'll never see her again.
I went into the forest because I had done it many times before. I recorded everything I explored, not because I thought something bad would happen, but because documenting it gave me structure and focus while walking alone for hours. That morning felt normal enough for me not to question my decisions, even when I parked farther than usual and noticed there were no other vehicles nearby. I told myself that silence was expected in places like this, and that isolation was part of the experience I was looking for. I started recording as soon as I crossed the tree line, describing the terrain and my route out loud so I could retrace my steps later if I needed. The forest looked ordinary, dense but familiar, and that false sense of normality made it easier to ignore the fact that I had no signal and no clear trail guiding me anymore. I noticed the first photograph when I stopped to adjust the camera strap, and at first, I thought it was trash left behind by someone else. When I got closer, I realized it was a printed missing person poster, carefully stapled to the tree at chest height. As I recorded it, I felt confused rather than scared, because the photo looked official and detailed, complete with a name and date. I stepped back to get a wider shot, and that's when I saw another poster on the next tree, and another one beyond that. I walked slowly, filming every image while trying to understand why they were placed so evenly, always facing the same direction. The deeper I went, the more posters appeared, and it became impossible to believe this was random or abandoned. I stopped to talk to the camera for a moment and listened, not expecting to hear anything specific, but needing to confirm that I was still alone. The quiet didn't reassure me, and for the first time, I considered turning back, even though curiosity kept pulling me forward. Before moving forward, I stood still and tried to calm my breathing, telling myself that panicking without proof would only make things worse. I checked my battery, adjusted the camera, and convinced myself to document a bit more before leaving. The posters started forming patterns, and that realization made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. They weren't just nailed to trees randomly. They were marking paths, intersections, and clearings that were invisible unless you followed the images. As I slowly rotated in place, filming the surrounding trees, I heard footsteps that didn't match my own movement. They were steady and synchronized, which made it impossible to dismiss them as animals or falling branches. When I spotted the group moving through the trees, my chest tightened and my legs felt unsteady, because there was something deeply wrong about how coordinated they were. Their shaved heads caught the light, and none of them spoke or reacted to my presence. I backed away carefully, trying not to draw attention, but the ground beneath me collapsed suddenly and yanked me upward with violent force. The trap snapped around my ankle and hoisted me into the air, slamming my body hard enough to knock the breath out of me. Hanging upside down, I shouted until my throat burned, watching the group drift away without urgency, as if they already knew I wasn't going anywhere. The pain in my leg grew sharper with every movement, and the realization that no one was coming settled in slowly and heavily. Hours passed as I remained suspended, fighting cramps, exhaustion, and fear that kept escalating as daylight disappeared. When footsteps finally returned, My relief vanished the moment I saw a single man standing beneath me, calmly observing my condition. He welcomes me. He cut the rope without warning, letting me crash to the ground, and immediately kicked me hard enough to curl my body inward. He didn't rush, didn't shout, and didn't seem angry, which made everything feel more deliberate and controlled. Before moving me, he waited in silence, scanning the trees as if listening for signals I couldn't hear. That pause made it clear that this wasn't improvisation, but routine, and that realization made my chest tighten with real fear. He dragged me through dense brush until we reached a truck hidden beneath branches and leaves, and tied my hands with practiced precision. Every bump during the drive sent pain through my body, and I couldn't tell how far we traveled or in which direction. The house appeared suddenly between trees, isolated and deliberately placed far from any road. Inside, everything was clean and stripped of personality, with a single chair fixed to the floor and restraints already attached. He shaved my head without explanation, pressing my skull down when I resisted, and every movement he made was calm and confident. He hit me repeatedly, not out of rage, but to keep me compliant, while asking questions that felt meaningless and disconnected. He slammed my head against the back of the chair to keep me still while shaving, warning me not to move if I wanted to keep my teeth intact. When I tried to pull my arms, he punched me in the stomach hard enough to still my breath and waited until I could breathe again, just to do it a second time. He pressed his boot against my injured ankle, applying slow pressure while watching my reaction, clearly measuring how much pain was enough without breaking me yet. Others entered the room later and watched without reacting, their faces blank and detached. One of them, however, looked at me longer than the rest, and that prolonged eye contact made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. Before anything changed, the man left the room and locked the door behind him, leaving me alone with the group. The silence that followed felt heavier than the violence that came before. The man who had been watching me stepped forward slowly, checking the door and the windows before kneeling beside the chair. His hands trembled as he cut the restraints, and the fear on his face felt real and uncontrolled. "You can't stay here." When he lifted his sleeve, I saw a scar that matched one of the posters I had filmed earlier, and the connection hit me hard enough to make my breathing uneven. He wasn't part of this by choice, and whatever held him there had already broken him. He pointed toward a back exit and stayed behind as I stumbled through the door, barely able to stay upright. I ran without direction, driven by panic rather than strategy, falling and getting up repeatedly until I reached the road. The police listened and followed me back into the forest, taking my account seriously enough to search the area thoroughly. I showed them the footage I had uploaded earlier, explaining the layout and the paths marked by the posters. When we arrived, there was nothing left to find. The trees were bare, the ground showed no signs of disturbance, and the house simply did not exist. Search teams returned multiple times, but every attempt ended the same way, with no evidence and no explanation. The people from the posters remained missing, and no new leads ever surfaced. Life didn't return to normal after that, even though the world around me moved on quickly. My injuries healed enough to function, but the memory of that place stayed sharp and persistent. Whatever happened in that forest didn't end when I escaped. And the fact that nothing was found makes it clear that the system protecting those people is still intact. I don't think the missing were meant to be found, and I'm certain that I was never meant to leave.
People think the last subway is quiet, but it's abandoned, not quiet. That's a big difference. That night I was coming back from work, just wanting to get home. The station was still lit, but it felt like it had been forgotten on purpose. The train arrived late and almost empty, with only a few people sitting far from each other, staring at their phones or the floor. No one made eye contact, and no one spoke, which felt normal for that hour. But it also made every sound louder, every movement more noticeable. When I got off at my stop, the doors closed behind me with a sound that felt final, like the end of something I wasn't ready to notice yet. I walked towards the exit, passing the open turnstiles, thinking about food and sleep and nothing else. That's when I realized how empty the station really was, because even the background noise was gone, and all I could hear was the buzz of the lights and my own steps echoing too clearly. She grabbed my arm hard enough to stop me completely, and the shock of it made my heart jump. I turned and saw a young woman standing way too close, breathing fast, her eyes wide and unfocused, like she'd been running for a long time and never really stopped. Her clothes were dirty, her hair was stuck to her face, and she kept looking past me instead of at me. "Please, I need help. It's following me." I asked her what she meant and tried to pull back my arm, but she held on tighter and shook her head, clearly panicking, clearly not thinking straight. She kept glancing toward the tunnels like she expected something to appear at any second, and that made me uneasy in a way that I couldn't explain yet. Then I really looked at her face, and something clicked in my head that made my stomach drop. I had seen her before, not in person, but on posters taped to walls and poles, the kind people stopped noticing after a few weeks. A missing girl. Same eyes. I told her I recognized her and that people were looking for her, but she didn't look relieved at all. She whispered that it didn't matter anymore, that nothing worked once it noticed you, and then, without warning, she let go of me and ran back into the station, toward the darker side where no one ever goes. For a moment I stood there, frozen by confusion rather than fear, trying to decide if I was about to do something very stupid or very necessary. The station felt wrong now. Not empty, but tense, like something was being held back. The lights flickered slightly, not enough to go out, just enough to make me notice. I told myself she was hurt and scared, and that leaving her alone would be worse than following her. So I ran after her, calling out for her to stop, even though my voice sounded weak in that space. Her footsteps echoed ahead of me, fast and uneven, leading me past areas I'd never used before. She slipped through a maintenance gate that was open just enough to pass, and the smell changed immediately, turning damp and metallic. The lights were spaced far apart, leaving long stretches of darkness between them, and I had to slow down to avoid slipping on the wet floor. Every step made me more aware of how far I was from the main station. When I finally caught up to her in a wide service area filled with old equipment and broken signs, I grabbed her arm again, breathing hard, my chest burning from the run. She fought me, not with clear movements, but with panic, twisting and hitting my shoulder, repeating the same word again and again. "Guardian! Guardian! Guardian!" She said it like it was a fact, not a story, like something everyone should already know. I tried to calm her down, telling her we could go back and find help, but she suddenly went still in a way that scared me more than the struggling. Her eyes locked onto something behind me, and her face changed completely, like all the panic turned into pure terror at once. She started crying without making any sounds and lifted her hands towards her face, digging her nails into her skin as if she was trying to escape her own head. I grabbed her wrists and held them down. My heart was racing as I told her to stop, that there was nothing there, even though I hadn't looked yet and didn't really believe myself. She kept staring past my shoulder, her body shaking, her breathing uneven, and she tried again to reach her eyes, stronger this time, desperate, like hurting herself was the only option she had left. I held her tight, struggling to keep control, feeling how thin she was, how little strength she had. Then, the sound came from the tunnel behind us. Deep and heavy, like something big shifting its weight against concrete. The floor vibrated slightly, dust falling from above, and my focus broke for a second, as fear finally took over. That second was enough. She tore herself free and ran straight into the darkness, screaming for me not to let it see her. I chased her again, even though every instinct told me to turn around and run the other way, because the sound behind me was closer now and clearly moving. Each step echoed heavier than it should have, and the air felt thick in my lungs as I forced myself to keep going. When I finally looked back, I saw it, filling the tunnel, a massive shape barely fitting between the walls. Its body was moving with slow confidence instead of speed. It wasn't human, not even close. It had a broad frame and its head was shaped all wrong. Horns were scraping against the ceiling as it advanced. I tripped when my foot caught on something unseen, slamming my knee into the floor hard enough to make my vision blur. The pain was sharp and immediate, but fear pushed me back up as the sound of its breathing grew louder behind me, wet and heavy. I ran into a storage room with no exit, shelves lining the walls. My mind was racing as I searched for anywhere to go. I stepped into the room slowly, blocking the doorway completely as its presence filled the space, making it hard to think straight. It reached out and crushed one of the metal shelves with ease, the noise loud and final, and I barely managed to slip past it, feeling heat and movement close enough to touch my back as I escaped. I don't remember the exact path I took after that, only that I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed in pain. I followed emergency lights instead of logic, and when I finally burst through an exit door and onto the platform, the normal sounds of the city hit me all at once. The station looked clean and empty again, like nothing had happened. And that made everything worse, because it felt like I was the only proof that any of this was real. I collapsed on a bench, shaking, checking the tunnels again and again. But there was nothing there. Police came later and listened without interrupting, but their faces told me enough. They searched, they checked cameras. They didn't find the girl. But there was footage of a strange figure. I stopped taking the subway at night after that, even when it meant walking long distances or spending money I didn't have. But I never want to cross paths with that creature again. Since then, I no longer believe in reality as we know it.
If you ever lose someone and nobody finds the body, the story never really ends. This is not a story about closure or learning something from pain, because nothing good came out of it. We were on vacation and we went skiing, just a normal adventure for a couple. The place was busy but controlled, with clear signs, open trails, and rescue teams everywhere, which made everything feel safe. She was always more confident than me on skis, faster and less cautious, while I preferred staying on wide trails and following the rules. We joked about that difference constantly, and that day was no different, which is why nothing felt dangerous or serious at first. The trail split near the middle of the mountain, with one path clearly marked and crowded, and another one narrower, quieter, but still officially open. She stopped, pointed at the narrow path, and smiled like it was an obvious choice, while I hesitated and told her I would take the main trail and meet her at the bottom. She didn't argue. She just pushed forward and started going down without looking back, moving fast and confidently like she always did. I watched her red jacket for a few seconds until the curve of the slope swallowed her completely. When I reached the bottom of my trail, she wasn't there, and at first I assumed she was just ahead, maybe talking to someone or adjusting her gear. I waited, checked my phone, walked around the lift area, and told myself to relax because there was no reason to panic yet. Minutes passed, then more minutes, and the place started to empty as the afternoon faded, which made every absence feel louder. I tried calling her, sending messages, checking every nearby spot where she could have stopped, but nothing made sense anymore. That was the moment I went to ski patrol, still hoping this was just a misunderstanding. still believing that in a few minutes she would appear annoyed and laughing about how dramatic I was being. Once the search officially started, everything slowed down in a way that made my thoughts race even more. I gave her name, her photos, her clothes, repeating the same information to different people until it stopped feeling real. Rescue teams went up and down the mountain with dogs, radios, and snowmobiles, while I stood nearby pretending to be useful, even though there was nothing I could actually do. As night fell, the cold became sharper and the mountain looked empty and indifferent. I was told to go inside and rest, but I refused, staying awake near the base, watching the darkness and imagining her somewhere out there, waiting and getting colder. The next day brought helicopters, more people, and more organized searching, but also a change in tone that I noticed immediately. The questions became more careful, more repetitive, as if they were already checking for mistakes rather than expecting good news. Before the real fear fully settled, I was taken into a small office where they explained survival limits, exposure times, and weather conditions, using calm voices that did not match the situation at all. Days passed and hope started changing shape. Posters were printed, messages spread online, and her parents arrived with faces that looked older than they should have. Searches continued, but they became shorter and more cautious, focusing on areas already checked. When they finally told us that chances of survival were extremely low, I argued quietly, insisting that she was strong, experienced, and capable, but my voice sounded weak even to me. The official decision to stop active searching felt worse than hearing about death, because there was nothing final about it. People slowly returned to their lives and messages of support became less frequent. I went back home, kept working, and answered questions with short explanations, while inside I stayed stuck on that mountain, replaying the moment she disappeared and wondering how a single choice could erase a person so completely. 5 years later, on a night, the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting a delivery or a neighbor, and my brain took a few seconds to understand what my eyes were seeing. She was standing there, alive, clean, and calm, wearing clothes I had never seen before, with darker hair cut shorter than I remembered. Her face looked relaxed, almost happy, and that expression hit me harder than any injury ever could, because it did not match 5 years of cold fear and silence. She said my name in a normal tone and stepped inside without hesitation, looking around the apartment as if she was visiting a place she already knew. I started asking questions immediately, too many at once, but she avoided every single one without getting defensive, repeating that she did not want to talk about the mountain. When she said she had nowhere to go, I let her stay because my thoughts were a mess. After all, part of me was still frozen on that slope waiting for her to come back. The first night was quiet but uncomfortable, with small things that did not feel right if I paid attention. She barely touched her food, chewing slowly and stopping for long moments like she forgot what she was doing, while her eyes stayed fixed on nothing in particular. Over the next days, her behavior became harder to explain. She woke up before sunrise every morning and stood by the window for long stretches, not looking outside but slightly downward, like she was watching something move just out of sight. Sometimes I would find her standing in the hallway or the living room, completely still, eyes open, breathing slow, as if she had paused in the middle of an action and never resumed it. When I spoke to her during those moments, she reacted late, turning her head slowly and smiling like she was embarrassed to be caught. One night, I followed a noise into the backyard and found her crouched low, scooping dirt into her mouth with both hands, chewing without urgency or disgust. When I called her name, she didn't answer, and when I touched her shoulder, she flinched sharply and stared at me like she didn't recognize me. She apologized afterward, smiling again, saying she was just tired and adjusting, but the explanation did not fit what I had seen. I started sleeping less, locking my door sometimes without fully admitting why, and watching her closely during the day. What scared me the most was how normal she acted between those moments, laughing at jokes and talking about the future like nothing had ever interrupted her life. That contrast made it harder to convince myself that this was just trauma. Whatever came back was not the same person who disappeared on that mountain. The tension inside the apartment kept building quietly. That night, the house was silent until fast footsteps echoed down the hallway. My door opened violently and she stood there holding a kitchen knife, her face focused and empty. She moved toward me without speaking, swinging the knife with force that felt practiced, hiding the mattress and tearing fabric as I rolled away and fell to the floor. I tried to block her arm, but she was stronger than I expected, and the blade cut my arm just enough to hurt and distract me. I pushed her with everything I had, sending her into the wall hard enough to make a loud crack, and for a second I thought she was injured. Instead, she looked at me and started laughing, loud and uncontrolled, like the situation amused her deeply. She ran out of the room and out of the apartment, still laughing as she disappeared down the stairs, leaving behind blood, broken furniture, and a silence that felt heavier than any noise she had made. The police took my statement seriously, but didn't find her. They looked at old photos, listened carefully, and eventually reached the same dead end everyone else had reached before. No sightings followed, no updates, and no explanation that made sense. Sometimes I wonder if the woman who came back was ever really her, or if something else learned how to walk, speak, and smile like her after she disappeared.
My name is Adam. I'm 18 years old, and I'm not someone who likes a lot of drama. I live in a small town where everything seems to repeat itself day after day. Everything's always the same. No big surprises. My sister Emma is 10 years old, and since her parents work late, I have to pick her up from school. No big deal, really. Just a walk of about 15 minutes that we always do together. The route is always the same. We pass the same street in front of the same houses. One of them, however, always caught my eye. Not because it's particularly old or strange, but because in its garden, there's something I don't like, even though I haven't told anyone. A scarecrow with a pumpkin hat. The body is simple, with tattered clothes and outstretched arms like any other scarecrow. But what makes me uncomfortable is that the pumpkin always seemed to be looking in different directions. Every time I pass by, the head is turned a different way. At first I thought someone was in charge of moving it from time to time. But after so many times, I started to sense something else. Something about that thing disturbed me, although I didn't exactly know what. Worst of all, sometimes I felt like it was looking directly at me, as if its empty pumpkin eyes were pointed at me, watching me. It was absurd, but that feeling made me walk faster every time. I never told Emma about it. She didn't pay much attention to the scarecrow. I think I was the only one who noticed it that much. She didn't pay much attention to the scarecrow. Something inside me told me it was better not to talk about it, not to give it more importance than I had already had in my mind. 3 days ago, like any other day, I went to pick up Emma from school. The day had been exhausting, and the truth is the last thing I wanted to do was go through that damn house again. But I did, as usual. However, this time something was different. The scarecrow was gone. I stopped dead in front of the house. I looked around, trying to see if he had been moved somewhere. There was no sign of him. I stood still, checking to see if he had been put somewhere else. Then Emma tugged on my arm. Emma asked me what was wrong, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to scare her, so I told her it was nothing and just kept walking. But suddenly, a man appeared in front of us. He was an old man, with dirty clothes and messy hair. The old man had a blank stare and a tremor in his hands. We stopped in our tracks.
Have you seen him?
I didn't understand what he meant. Emma moved closer to me, as if sensing something wasn't right.
Have you seen the scarecrow? It's gone.
I replied without thinking too much, just wanting the man to move away. But instead, he took a step closer to us, a crooked smile on his face.
Be careful. He's mad at you. He doesn't like you looking at him so much.
Wait, you're the one who's always moving the scarecrow?
No, Don't touch him. He won't let me touch him. Seriously, though, be careful. He talks to me in my sleep. He tells me you look at him. If he's gone, maybe it's for something.
Uncomfortable and looking out for Emma, I made us keep walking and ignored him. Emma was scared, but I told her not to worry. There are always crazy people on the street. But that same night, I couldn't stop thinking about the old man. How did he know I used to watch the Scarecrow? When I went to sleep, the first thing that came to my mind was the Scarecrow. The pumpkin with its empty smile, and the eyes that always seemed to be more attentive than they should. That feeling followed me until I finally fell asleep. That's when the nightmare started. I was in my room, unable to move. My eyes were open, but my body was completely paralyzed. I tried to move my hands and feet, but nothing. Terror invaded me when I realized that something was in the room with me. In front of me, in the corner, was the Scarecrow. But it wasn't the same one I had seen in the garden of the house. No, this one was alive. Its eyes, or the holes where they should be, glowed with a strange light, and its gourd seemed to writhe as if something was moving inside it. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. Then, from the holes in the pumpkin, worms began to come out. First one, then hundreds, thousands. They slowly advanced toward me, crawling across the floor, across my bed, and across my body. I felt them crawling into my ears, into my mouth, into my eyes. It was an indescribable horror. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only feel how those creatures entered my body. And then, I woke up. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart beating a mile a minute. It took me a moment to realize that it had all been a dream. I staggered to my feet, my head spinning, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water to calm down. When I returned before going back to bed, I looked out the window into the courtyard. What I saw froze me in my tracks. There, in the middle of the garden, was the Scarecrow. My first impulse was to go out. I wanted to see it up close, to confirm that it wasn't another nightmare. I took courage and opened the door, walking towards the pumpkin that was perfectly placed at the top. I looked at it closely. The smile was still there, empty and crooked, but there was nothing strange about it. No worms, no light, just a pumpkin, motionless. But when I turned around to go back, I felt a pressure on the back of my head. Something was squeezing my skull hard. I fell to my knees, screaming in pain. The pressure was increasing. It felt like my head was going to explode. The bones began to crunch, and the pain became unbearable. The Scarecrow was squeezing me. It was moving as if it were a person. I could feel my skull cracking into 1,000 pieces. My eyes were popping out. I could only see red. The blood coming out of my eye sockets had blurred all my vision. And then, suddenly, I woke up again. My breathing was agitated, my body trembling. I had fallen asleep again. Or maybe I had never woken up in the first place. I had no idea what had happened. I looked at the clock. It was early morning, but I couldn't go back to sleep. I got up again, this time more calmly, trying to convince myself that everything that was happening wasn't real, that they were just dreams provoked by the old man and his words. I went to the courtyard again, looking for some sign of what I had seen before. But there was nothing. The Scarecrow was gone. I returned to my room, calmer, though still with an uneasy feeling. But as I entered, I fell to the floor in surprise. I pinched myself to see if it was a dream. But no, I was awake. On my bed rested a pumpkin, identical to the one in the Scarecrow.
How many of you have been on the deep web, And no, I'm not talking about the child's play of downloading to enter the first level of the deep web and then leaving. That's for amateurs. I mean, how many of you have been on the real deep web? The part of the deep web where scary things really happen. Where the government hides all the secrets and where red rooms are rampant. Unless you're hackers, I don't think you've been there. So I have to tell you a story. A story where you'll learn that no matter how prepared you are for the deep web, there will always be someone or something that will surprise you. I still remember everything as if it was yesterday. The date was February 14th, 2022. I remember because it was Valentine's Day, shortly before my girlfriend and I had separated. She simply contacted me by phone and crying said that everything between us was over. I didn't understand why, but when I tried to call her, she didn't answer. I went to her house worried, but some neighbors told me that she had moved a few days before and that she was with someone else. I didn't understand what happened to her, but I was heartbroken, so you can imagine how I could feel on Valentine's Day. I was going to spend that day at home exploring the deep web, going further than I had ever gone before. I was convinced that no one would catch me. I had always been a very good hacker, and after being with my ex-girlfriend who worked in computer security, I had become much better. I felt invulnerable. I felt that no one could catch me, no matter what files I investigated and whose files they were. The more I researched, the deeper I got into the deep web. I felt I was close to reaching my limits, close to discovering something and maybe get into trouble. That would be a fun activity for Valentine's Day. As I continued to move forward, a pop-up surprised me. A pop-up on the deep web? I must admit I was very surprised. There are no advertisements on the deep web. This had to be something directed at me. But how could they do that? How could they direct a message to me? Did anyone know what I was doing? That was impossible. I had taken all the necessary measures so that no one would launch an attack on me. When I saw the pop-up, I noticed that it looked like an advertisement. Or rather, an invitation. It looked like an invitation to play a game. Suddenly, a text window opened. Someone started talking to me. Normally, I wouldn't talk to him as this can bring consequences. But his message left me so perplexed that I had to reply. Hi, Rick. You seem to be a very curious guy. Would you like to play a game with us? No, thanks. I think I'm good. Maybe another day I'll do it. I decided to answer him sarcastically, but not be so confrontational either. He may have been uncomfortable with that message, but I decided not to indulge him. I wouldn't ask him how he knew my name or anything about this game since that's what he expected me to do. I assumed that the attacker was related to the government entity I was investigating. Although I never assumed that these people would send me these kind of messages. Part of me thought it made sense. After all, I was on the deep web. Rick, unfortunately, I have to insist that you play. Otherwise, your ex-girlfriend will never be released. Reading this, I was shocked. How could he possibly have said that? And how did he know about my girlfriend? How could he say that she was kidnapped? At that moment, I realized something that terrified me and made me discover that I was involved in something really serious. You're not from any government entity, are you? The game is simple. You just have to guess where I am. It's not too hard, is it? You only have one chance to guess right. I can be behind your bathtub, hidden in the kitchen, or in the basement. As I read these words, I was completely paralyzed. From one moment to the next, I went from being bored at home, sad to arrive on Valentine's Day without my girlfriend. And in the next few minutes, I was worried that there was a psychopath in my house. There's no way this psycho is really here. He has to be lying. We both know I'm not lying, Rick. Upon reading this message, I immediately disconnected the webcam and microphone from my computer. Did you really think you were going to scare me by hacking my webcam? Who says I hacked your webcam? Don't you understand that I'm in your house? If you don't give me an answer in the next 3 minutes, I will kill your girlfriend. Reading that message, I was completely perplexed. There was no way. How could he hear me if I disconnected my webcam? Unless he had microphones installed in the house. That means that he could be in my house. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Desperate and without thinking, I went to the kitchen to get a knife and started checking the places that the man told me he could be. I knew it was a very bad idea. I knew I could die for this, but the fact that he told me that my girlfriend was trapped and kidnapped made me make a quick decision without thinking. I had to search as soon as possible. I quickly checked the kitchen with a knife in hand, but there was no one there. There was no place to hide at the kitchen either. Clearly, the man wanted me to quickly discard this place. The next place was the bathroom. I quickly opened the bathroom doors and turned on the light. No one was there. At that moment, something caught my attention. The bathroom curtain was closed. I always leave it open. Terrified, I approached slowly with the knife. I didn't have the energy to do it. I felt like I was going to cry and drop the knife and run at any moment. But I didn't. I had to do it. I had to catch whoever was invading my house just to make sure my girlfriend was okay. With a war cry, I ran to the curtain and opened it. Behind it, there was no one. At that moment, I felt a noise behind me. I peeked through the bathroom door, and in the distance, I saw the basement door. It was opening slowly, and behind it, in the middle of all the darkness, I could make out only two dark eyes staring at me. I immediately ran to my room. I heard the door behind me open and someone running towards me. I didn't turn around. I just ran, and as soon as I entered my room, I locked the door. On the other side, someone was banging on it violently, trying to get in. I could hear screams full of anger, while that person was slamming the door without success, since it was a very hard door. 30 seconds! You were in my basement. There's your answer. You were in the basement. Now you're behind my door. Now let her go. Suddenly, the door started banging louder and louder. I thought they wouldn't be able to break it, but at that moment, I realized that it would surely be destroyed in a matter of seconds. And so from 1 second to the next, the door burst open with a kick and a huge man rushed in. As soon as he saw me, the man grabbed me by the hair and dragged me violently across the floor and threw me against the wall. Before I could react, the man grabbed my head again and pulled me towards the computer. As I looked at it, I saw that there was a camera in my basement. The man held a cell phone to my ear, and I heard a titular voice come out of it. You were right. I was in the basement, although you were wrong that I was behind your door. As I said, we will free your girlfriend. At that moment, it was seen on the computer camera that the closet in my basement opened, where my girlfriend's corpse fell. Our clients are very satisfied with your story. You deserve to know the truth. What have you done to her? Why? Congratulations. Your girlfriend never left you. We forced her to say that before we killed her. That neighbor who told you she moved, that was me. It was nice to meet you, although I'm sorry to tell you that your girlfriend was always in this basement, even though we cleaned it constantly so it wouldn't generate odor. Why? Because you were curious. Do you think you wouldn't attract attention in the deep levels of the deep web? A lot of my clients belong to cults, and you can't mess with these people. They have more fun than you think, and you have a lot of fun. But all good things must come to an end. And with that said, it was all over. The man casually let me go and simply walked out of the front door as if he had been a guest of mine. Meanwhile, the corpse of my girlfriend remained there, in my basement. I could never recover from what happened. I could never again date a new girl, go on the deep web, or build any kind of trusting relationship. What happened that day has traumatized me forever. And you know what the worst part is? I feel like I'm not done yet. Sometimes I see strange people looking at me in the street with a strange smile. I don't feel that these people are the ones who attacked me, but the cult that hired them. I feel that they will always be there, watching me, having fun with me, ready to attack me when I least expect it.
Hi, my name is Richard, and I'm just a normal guy. I'm married with 2 kids. Today my kids are pretty mad at me. They both had a field trip, and I didn't let either of them go. All their friends were going, and I still decided not to let them go. They may not have understood why, but my wife did. And now you'll understand why I didn't let them go. Several years ago, when I was still in high school, we had a field trip that turned out to be the scariest experience of my life. It was a sunny fall day, the kind of day when you don't expect anything to go wrong. We were taken into an ancient forest, seemingly harmless, with narrow paths and tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight. The cool air and the crunching of the dry leaves under our feet created an environment that should have been peaceful. But, as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. At the beginning, the trip was completely normal. We knew the tour guide, Mr. Ford, so my parents trusted him to take us on the trip. Once we got there, the school bus pulled into the forest, and Mr. Ford went to run some errands at the ranger's cabin. That's when the weirdness started to happen. After a few minutes of just standing around doing nothing, the tour guide came back, but this was not Mr. Ford. The tour guide was an older man with a cold and distant look on his face. He seemed very demanding and professional, though not very good with children.
Listen, guys. Mr. Ford's not feeling well, so he asked me to be his replacement. You can call me Mr. Ashford. I was a guide for a long time, and even though I don't work with kids from your school, everyone here knows me.
What happened to Mr. Ford?
Health issues. Nothing any of you would be interested in. Now I need you kids to listen to one more thing. We will continue with the trip as long as you listen to everything I tell you to do. Understood?
With that said, the trip continued. Mr. Ashford took us deeper into the forest than we had originally planned. As we moved on, I noticed that the atmosphere was getting thicker, and the feeling of being watched came over me. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but something in the air wasn't right. As we moved deeper into the forest, I noticed that some of my classmates seemed uneasy, as if they felt the same way I did. Ignoring the uncomfortable feeling, the guide led us to a more secluded area, away from other groups exploring the same area. It was then that I saw him for the first time. Among the trees, a lone man dressed in rags with disheveled hair was just staring at us. His gaze was intense, almost predatory. When the guide saw him, he simply greeted him as if he were an old friend and walked on, ignoring the puzzled looks of the students. We continued our march, but the discomfort persisted. We felt his eyes on us. He didn't look like a simple lost hiker or a friend of Mr. Ashford's, but since he knew him, we all trusted him blindly. As we moved on, the guide led us to a clearing in the forest where we decided to take a break. We sat on fallen logs while he told us about the history of the place. As he spoke, my eyes couldn't help but search for the strange man, but he was no longer in sight. We decided to resume our walk after a brief pause. It was then that things took a darker turn. As we walked, the guide became increasingly incoherent in his explanations, as if he was losing his mind. He would laugh to himself and make jokes that were totally out of place and made no sense. It was as if he was someone else. Suddenly, the guide stopped and gave us a very strange order.
Well, guys, from now on, you'll have to look for the focal point.
What's that?
Ha! You guys look for something out of the ordinary in the forest without going too far. Sooner or later, everyone will find it.
No one understood what he meant, but we obeyed. That's when strange things started to happen. My classmates began to disappear one by one. Muffled screams echoed through the forest, but when we tried to locate the source, we found nothing but shadows in the trees. When there were only a few of us left, I finally saw the man in rags again. He materialized out of the underbrush with a sadistic smile that chilled my blood. The man had an axe in his hands and was slowly approaching us. We started to back away in fear, but suddenly we were confronted by the guide, who now seemed completely unhinged. They both looked at us with merciless eyes, enjoying the palpable fear that was in the air. We tried to flee, but we were surrounded. It was then that I understood what was happening. These two men were together. Everything the guide had told us so far was a lie, an elaborate lie to get us safely off the trail. Suddenly, the two men rushed towards us, grabbing a teenager each. Some of us wanted to fight, but we were no more than 15 years old, and no one dared to stand up to them. We ran and ran. Some of us started to get lost, and then we heard their screams in the forest. They chased us through the forest faster and faster, with unhinged laughter echoing all around us. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, but I couldn't stop running. The forest seemed endless, as if we were trapped in a hellish maze. Finally, when we were on the verge of exhaustion, they cornered us in a dark clearing. They surrounded us, laughing with blood-chilling malevolence. The nightmare reached its climax when the guide, with crazed eyes, began to talk about rituals and sacrifices.
Haven't you found the focal point yet, children?
The focal point is in the center of your breasts.
It's where your heart is, and soon everyone will be able to see it.
We will rip it out of your chests and show it to you before we give you to the forest.
We all began to cry. We all felt that our last hour was coming and there was nothing we could do to avoid them. But it was then that I made a desperate decision. While the guide and the man were still talking about what they were going to do to us, I quickly slipped through a small space between the trees and ran as fast as I'd ever ran before. I didn't look back. I didn't think of anything but escaping from that horror. I ended up back at the hut where it had all started. I opened the doors and desperately looked for help, and that's when I found a familiar face. It was Mr. Ford, brutally butchered. I fell to the floor and vomited. I never thought I would come across such a scene. I opened the door and ran, everywhere, totally lost and bewildered. Fortunately, I managed to find help from a group of hikers who were in a busier part of the forest. We called the police, but when they returned to the place where the nightmare took place, they found no trace of the perpetrators or my missing classmates. They were never heard from again. Today, the relatives are still looking for them. But after the story I told them, they lost hope. Many have asked me if the screams I heard were those of their children. It was really very difficult to distinguish them. Today, I'm old enough to be able to think about what happened to me without crying. But you know what? It scarred me for life. As I told you before, I will never let my children go on any field trip when I'm not there to take care of them.
Hey, my name is Carson, and I'll tell you a story of how a stalker almost ruined my life. A short time ago, I installed one of those security cameras that activate every time someone rings the doorbell or approaches the door. The idea was simple, a deterrent to potential burglars or stalkers. However, nothing could stop whoever was harassing me during that time. It was a night like any other. I was home alone, engrossed in the monotony of watching TV, when I received the first notification from the camera app. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, maybe some shadow or movement caused by the wind. But the second notification made me look up from the screen. On the small screen of my phone, I saw a man standing in my doorway. His face was hidden by a hood, but his posture denoted a kind of tension. He wasn't carrying any bags or packages. He was just standing there as if waiting for something. I froze for a moment, wondering who it could be and what he might want at this time of night. I decided not to open the door and instead activated the intercom to ask him what he needed. However, all I got was an ominous silence. The figure stood motionless for a few minutes, and then, as if it had received some invisible signal, it turned and walked away. It was strange, but I thought maybe it was just a lost neighbor or someone who had taken a wrong turn. I closed the app and went back to my business, trying to forget about the strange visit. But the peace didn't last long. After a few hours, the bell rang again. This time, I was more prepared. I looked at the screen, and again, the same man was there. With his hood still covering his face, he seemed to be looking directly into the camera. I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. I opted to ignore the situation and not interact with him. But what happened next made me reconsider my decision. The figure raised his hand and slammed the door several times loudly. The sound echoed through the house, and its persistence filled me with discomfort. Getting no response, he finally withdrew again. A few days passed, and the nightly visits became an unsettling routine. Although I tried not to show it, the constant pressure began to get to me. The nights became tense. The ringing of the bell became a kind of psychological torture. I decided to report the incident to the police. But what would they do? Without clear evidence of a threat, they couldn't do much. They suggested increasing security in the house and being vigilant. So I installed brighter lights and reinforced the locks. But the figure kept coming. The police told me they would go around the neighborhood, but I looked out at night and hardly saw them. I couldn't blame them either. This man had been stalking me for weeks. Surely the police officers would have better things to do than watch a house for weeks waiting for a stalker to decide to strike when they didn't even know if he was going to. Hell, even I didn't know if he was going to do it. Maybe I was making too much trouble for something minuscule. Or at least, that's what I thought before the night when it all happened. That night started like any other. This time, I was more attentive than ever to the appearance of that man. I was going to catch him on camera, either on the doorbell camera or on my cell phone. I didn't have to wait long after bedtime before the door started to rattle. Someone was banging on it. I ran to the front door while calling the police. As soon as I told them what was happening, I disobeyed their advice to hide in my room and wait for them to come and go to the front door. I knew the police would not arrive in time. Somehow, I had to get a picture of them. Once I was at the door, I looked through the keyhole and set up my camera. But I was shocked. There was no one there. The stalker always takes much longer to leave, usually a long time knocking on my door. Maybe he saw a policeman or a neighbor and left. Whatever the case, he had escaped me again. I went back to my room to wait for the police, but suddenly, something surprised me. What was that noise? Without thinking if I was making the right decision, I quickly ran to the source of the noise. It was coming from the dining room. Once I arrived,